Do we take roll call?
Yes, we do, and I am just pulling down to the agenda to get there. Roll call. So let me start that. Shamika's having audio issues, so I will be taking care of this part of it. Let me get my pad set up. Here we go. All right. Commissioner Fine.
Present.
Commissioner Ejigu.
Present.
Commissioner Vice Chair Chima.
Present.
Commissioner Blake.
Present.
Commissioner Lindheim.
Present.
Commissioner Dangerfield.
Present.
Commissioner Ghosh.
Here.
Commissioner Hyde.
Present.
Commissioner Malvito.
Presente.
Gracias. Commissioner Polk. Commissioner Polk. Absent. Commissioner Mizell.
Here.
Commissioner Opton. Commissioner Opton. Commissioner Walker. Commissioner Harger.
Present.
Commissioner Diaz. Commissioner Lutzker.
Here.
And Commissioner Ho.
Present.
Thank you all for bearing with me. We now have,
Public comment?
well, I'll leave it in your hands.
Yeah, let's have public comment, please.
Okay, great. I will bring folks in. The first person to speak will be John Kaner. Let me bring him in. John, you should now be able to speak.
Hello. First of all, I want to thank the task force last week for the opportunity to speak and hear from some of our merchants. I just want to say before I get started, you know, it's been a really, really tough year for everyone, but particularly for these merchants. Our pedestrian counts have been down 85 to 65%. A lot of them have lost their life savings. And so there is a fair amount of frustration on their part, but so please, I think you can all understand that. And I was really grateful to have the opportunity to have them speak to you. I also want to thank David Mohammed. We're going to have a call tomorrow with my counterpart from the Telegraph bid to how we're going to do a listening session for merchants, nonprofits, arts organizations, and other businesses. I think it'll be very constructive to get that input. I also wanted to share with you some of the work that I'm doing specifically, and also what our organization is doing, and particularly through Street Plus. So I serve on the board of the California Downtown Association and the International Downtown Association. For the California Downtown Association, I head up a task force on homelessness and around severe mental illness. And we've been engaging with the Steinberg Institute and some of our other partners to see how we can constructively be part of that discussion. And we haven't really been present in Sacramento, so that's kind of new for us. We also just sent a couple weeks ago a letter to the district attorney, which I will forward to David. And David, if you can forward to the task force, but I want to read you one paragraph. And part of it is we're getting much more, you know, we want to be part constructive problem solving and help. And we realize the current system is broken and not working well. But I want to read you one paragraph and then I'll share the rest of this. Then I'd like to talk just a little bit about Street Plus. And I also want to mention Purdy Grissett, our operations manager, is on the call. Thank you, Purdy. While we recognize the critical need to reimagine public safety and in particular decriminalize certain behaviors related to severe mental illness and drug addiction, there must be consequences brought to bear for those who repeatedly break the law. Otherwise, we put our merchants and communities at whole at risk. Not only do we want to implement new specialized care units to provide the individuals the help they need and divert them from law enforcement and the criminal justice system, but we also need enforcement of our laws with consequences that remove violent individuals from our streets and discourage repeat offenses. So I just was on a board call the other day where my counterpart in San Francisco, she had been assaulted, 2 tourists were slashed. Clearly we need, a lot of our merchants are not, and other people are not feeling safe. And so I think there's clearly a balance, and we really appreciate opportunity to be heard. So I've been at the DBA for 12 years. I've known Buna for almost all of that time. And I've known Paul for a lot of that time also. We have 20, can Purdy give me a couple minutes? Dave?
I'll defer to Chair Chima for that.
Say that again, please.
Can Purdy give me a couple minutes? So I
Not a
have,
couple of minutes.
what?
You as an organization have 3, so I don't know
Okay.
where we are in those 3 minutes.
Okay, let me keep going. I'm going to be very brief. So we have 20 ambassadors that do cleaning and hospitality. We also, for the last 2.5 years, we've had a homeless outreach specialist. It's co-funded by Measure P, and we just started a community engagement ambassador program to deal with some of the safety issues. Of our ambassadors, we have 20, 15 are African-American, 4 Latinx, 1 white. One of the things I brought up with the electeds, a number of people, daily, our ambassadors deal with racial epithets, the N-word, Latinx epithets, and that's a challenging issue, and one that I think I'd like, and I've talked to Kate and I've talked to Jesse about it repeatedly. But I want to tell you a little about Street Plus. Street Plus is the service organization. They provide the ambassador services, and Steve Hilliard is available if you'd be interested in Purdy, our operations guy, to talk about what we've been doing social service outreach, what we've been doing with the community engagement ambassadors as early de-escalation and when PD is not available, and we've been working closely with the PD. I might add San Francisco is now using that model based on what we're doing in Berkeley. They're expanding in downtown. And Street Plus is 6 new outreach workers in Salt Lake City. They're doing outreach workers in Lancaster with job readiness training, homeless outreach in Burbank and Chicago and across the country. So I think, I know your schedule's really busy, but if you'd like, we'd be happy to come back and do a more thorough briefing about our ambassador services and what Street Plus and other folks are doing around the country. That's really it. I apologize. My dad just arrived. He's 90 years old, just arrived from Seattle. So I'm not going to be able to stay for the meeting, but I appreciate it's recorded. Buna, thank you so much for the time.
Thank you. I will now bring in our illustrious city auditor. City Auditor Wong, you're on mute, but you're now in to speak.
Hi, everyone. Good evening. I just wanted to first thank you all again for having me present our data results during last month's meeting and asking really insightful questions. It was just so great to see everybody so engaged. I wanted to follow up on a couple things. One of the tables in our report on page 24, it's the top 10 call types of events and arrest outcomes. We have updated this table because the data on the table is not correct. We had used a search term which picked up additional terms we did not need. And so the alarm arrests were too high. We've updated this on our report on our website. I just want to state that this does not impact any of the stop data arrests. Second, I wanted to let you all know that we were informed that the police department has uploaded 5 years of calls for service data, 2015 to 2019, in the city's data portal, which includes additional fields of data in response to our audit. So I just wanted to thank the department for doing this. We've not verified whether this is exactly the same data set that we have for this audit, but I just really want to take this moment to thank the police department for responding to our audit and providing this data to the public. And I will try to send you all this information. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jenny.
Okay, that does conclude our public comment. And I did want to just share with the task force that the open data portal data that our auditor referred to has also been published on the Reimagining Public Safety Task Force website as well. I will now open up the agenda again for you. There we go.
Thank you. Approval of minutes for the special meeting of April the 29th, 2021. Do I hear a motion?
Yeah, I'll make a motion to approve the minutes from April 29, 2021.
Second. Second that.
I will call the roll. The motion was from Commissioner Fine and the second was from Commissioner Harger.
Actually,
go.
it's from Upton.
Oh, it's Upton. I apologize.
It was from both. It was from Harger and Upton.
Thank you. Next time we will Rochambeau. Commissioner Fine?
Present, yes.
Thank you. Commissioner Ejigu?
Yes.
Commissioner Chima?
Yes.
Commissioner Blake? Commissioner Blake?
Yes.
Thank you. Commissioner Lindheim?
Yes.
Commissioner Dangerfield?
Yes.
Commissioner Ghosh?
Yes.
Commissioner Hyde?
Yes.
Commissioner Malvito?
Yes.
Commissioner Polk? Absent. Commissioner Mizell?
Yes.
Commissioner Upton?
Yes.
Commissioner Walker? Commissioner Harger?
Yes.
Commissioner Diaz?
Yes.
Thank you. Welcome.
Hello.
Commissioner Lutzker
Yes.
and Commissioner Hub.
Yes.
Thank you all. The minutes have been approved.
Thank you. We've asked for the subcommittees to be able to report back to the full task force, and the policing budget and alternatives to policing subcommittee has been concentrating more on policing and budget and has not yet gotten to the alternatives to policing. And there was some discussion around maybe adding that as a separate subcommittee. The one about alternatives to policing, you know, if we're asking for a certain amount of money from the city budget, then we need to be very clear on what it is that we want on the ground beyond SCU. We've also, the way we're doing this is read all the documentation, what's posted, and also what other people might be sending in to us, and then have discussions and then come up with questions for the next person or the next division that's going to be presenting. So to come in prepared and also to send our questions in a little bit ahead of time so David can pass them on to the folks who are going to be making presentations. The other piece was about streamlining this process just a little bit by our subcommittee suggesting that we have presentations that have 5 to 7 slides, PowerPoints with very specific, clear information that we must have to make decisions that night, and the packets be attached to our the packet that you guys send out, the larger reports. So these are 2 things that we would like to pose to the full task force and have sort of a discussion amongst all of us, because we have 15 minutes each. Is that right?
Yeah, for each subcommittee.
Okay, so those are the 2 big things that we're bringing to the full task force is, just testing to see where other people stand in terms of streamlining the process. So instead of having 4-hour meetings where there's a lot of presentation and not to all of us, it seems that there isn't enough time to even ask all our questions, and that we would also like time to be able to dialogue with each other in this setting. So that's the piece that we are sending forward to the entire task force to consider. Whether we put that on the agenda of the task force for the next meeting, that I think, David, you need to tell us. And the other was about adding a few more subcommittees. So I'll let that sit with folks. And after the next presentation from the community engagement folks, David, can we come back to my report and see if people want to make any motions to adding more subcommittees or a streamlined process of information sharing and presentations?
Sure. Are you suggesting we go to subcommittee reports, go back to them? Because we don't have an action item on the agenda.
Right. So we will put it on the next agenda, is what I'm asking.
Yeah, we can add. We can definitely take direction and add something to the next agenda,
Okay.
for sure. But do you want to? We're taking the agenda a little bit out of order now.
Yeah.
Did you want to finish up the subcommittee report section, or did you want to go back?
I think what happened was when it was scrolling, I caught the subcommittee report. Sorry about that, folks. It'll be quick. We'll come back to the action items. So we will.
Do I need to make a motion to move the subcommittee reports up to the top of the agenda?
I think that would be, from a procedural perspective, that would be appreciated.
All right.
Before we do that, I'd like to quickly interject. I apologize. I got a couple texts from friends saying they're unable to enter the meeting through the link provided on the agenda, and they're getting a message that says the host has another meeting in progress. I don't know if that's something we can remedy, but it seems important.
Can you hear me?
So
the meeting ID was changed a few days after I sent it out to you, but the correct meeting ID is on the community calendar as well as the website. So I'm not sure what link they're using.
They're using the link that's embedded in the agenda.
Have them, if you could text them, maybe just ask them to go to the community calendar on the city website and try that link.
Got it. Thank you, guys.
And there's a hyperlink as well, so they should be able to get right into the meeting. Sorry for the inconvenience.
Got it. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'll make the.
That's fine.
I was going to make the motion to move the subcommittee reports to the top of the agenda so they're the next item to address.
Okay. Is there a second?
I second the motion.
Thank you. Let me call roll. Commissioner Fine,
Yes.
Commissioner Ejigu,
Yes.
Vice Chair Chima,
Yes.
Commissioner Blake,
Yes.
Commissioner Linheim,
Yes.
Commissioner Dangerfield,
Yes.
Commissioner Ghosh,
Yes.
Commissioner Hyde,
Yes.
Commissioner Malvito,
Yes.
Commissioner Polk, Commissioner Mydell,
Yes.
Commissioner Opton,
Yes.
Commissioner Walker, Commissioner Harger,
Yes.
Commissioner Diaz,
Yeah.
Commissioner Lutzker,
Yes.
and Commissioner Ho.
Yes.
Thank you all. Back to you, Chair Chima.
Yeah. And I just got a text saying that people were able to get in using David, which you suggested. So just folks know. So I have about 6 more minutes on our report. And I wanted to ask if any of the other members of the Police Public Safety Subcommittee have anything to add? Or did I cover it pretty much? Okay. Next subcommittee report, community engagement.
Yes, the Community Engagement Subcommittee met today at 12:30 to go over the report. And Abby is going to present the first couple of points, and then I'm going to follow her. So do you want to start?
Yes, thank you. So the Community Engagement Subcommittee was very focused on inclusivity when reviewing the draft of the citywide survey. And this is based on the Berkeley City Council meeting at the outset that was committed to including all community members and groups in the process through the omnibus municipal legislation that was passed mid-July 2020. So some examples of the broad-based community engagement process, making it, comprehensive, include, of course, inclusivity, as I mentioned, but specifically by priority populations, having access to the citywide survey, and also generating a feeling of inclusion in the survey content itself, so that all populations can feel that the survey was written with them, us, in mind. And I think we've gotten, really a positive response in communicating between our subcommittee and Bright Research by way of Secretary David White. Thank you for that. So an example would be to ask about people's experience with the Berkeley Police Department. And the question initially was that how has Berkeley PD worked well in the community? And if you feel it would be helpful to describe your community by indicating what priority population one identifies with, example, by race, ethnicity, gender identity. So what we did was add a second sentence to the question to expressly ask participants to describe their community if helpful. This leaves it a little more open-ended and gives survey participants agency in trusting, I think, that they're being heard in this process. Another example was asking questions about people who live and work in Berkeley, or who work in Berkeley or have previously lived in Berkeley, but have been priced out due to gentrification over the course of the last 10 or so years. All of these people are part of the Berkeley community. People who work in Berkeley need to feel a sense of safety here. This is their place of employment. People who maybe have had been residents of Berkeley for generations prior, but no longer can afford to stay in Berkeley. This is evident in the diminishing diversity of our town. So we wanted to make this citywide survey open to all members of Berkeley community, including those who are not current residents or work in this town. And if that makes sense.
And then the second half of our meeting, we focused on what would be next steps for the community engagement subcommittee, and that might be coordinating with this alternatives to policing effort. As we're going to see tonight, I'm a member of the Specialized Care Unit Steering Committee, and Dr. Lisa Warhos, who's the Director of House Housing and Community Services, is going to present an overarching comprehensive project timeline of the SCU design that covers several months, and we're hoping to see something like that from Bright Research. They've just really marked it out. It's been a lot of engagement between the steering committee and the consultant, and we're hoping to see also with Bright Research some kind of outreach and engagement plan, which shows not only the dissemination of the citywide survey, but what other forums they're using, like listening sessions for specific communities, town halls, and other processes. In the SCU steering committee, we have been very fortunate to be able to look at the focus group questions, both for providers and for consumers, and to give input. And we've had a very collaborative process, and it's really evolved the questions just in the way the city survey has evolved. And we really appreciate that. We also wanted to ask that BurkDoc be part of this community engagement process. And lastly, we were talking today about the role of data analysis and how do we look at that separate and apart from policing or budgeting, but more in terms of what is the approach and framework for data analysis? How do we look at it in a way in stratifying race, ethnicity, gender, sexual orientation, and address intersectionality and other features of that? Or how do we look at public health equities and disparities and social determinants of health through the data analysis in order to be able to see the reallocations of funds based upon the qualitative and quantitative data that's collected during the community engagement processes? So we were just really covering what we've done and thinking about what the next steps would be and how can we collaborate with Bright Research in the city of Berkeley to really make this an inclusive process. And that was the end of our meeting today.
Thank you, Dr. Fine. I have a question. The task force is not yet aware that the public engagement clusters is starting to happen. And yet I thought I heard DBA say that they're having a meeting with David Mohammed and the Bright Institute. David, can you say a little bit more about that? Is that part of community engagement for us, or is that special things being set up?
I think what I might suggest is we have a topic on the agenda for community engagement where David Mohammed and the team will talk about their plan. And so they are meeting this Friday, I believe, with the business merchants to discuss getting them together to do a listening session with them. But I know that David will have an update later.
Thank you. I apologize to all our invited guests and presenters. We will go back up the agenda, and our first presenter is our police chief, Jennifer Lewis, giving us the police department overview number 2. Thank you so much for being here.
Good evening.
Yeah, I'm just looking for your name.
And I have a request. I can hear somebody's burst or someone's is not muted. the birds went away. Thank you.
David, I give, Jen's okay.
Thank you.
Okay, everybody can see the screen?
Yes.
Okay. Good evening. Thank you for having me back again. This evening, I'm going to be presenting with Lieutenant Turner, who joined us last time for our first overview, as well as Lieutenant McGee. And tonight, what we're going to do is take you through the process of how Berkeley officers are hired, the hiring process, as well as the training program. And we're also going to work on providing some demographic data for you about our department. As I shared at our last presentation, we want the task force to really have a deep understanding of how we're organized, how we're structured, the work that we do and how we do it, the training focus, the manner in which we allocate our budget, staffing levels, the way we ensure our department and officers perform to the best of their abilities and also follow not only the law, but our community values. And we understand that all of these topics are really important to the task force as you guys undertake the work that you're involved in. And so we're committed to coming back as many times as we need to. I understand that there's a real desire by this task force to understand and develop meaningful recommendations as a result. And so we want to make sure there's no questions that you have that remain unanswered. So we've really tried to focus the presentations to be deep, so you get a deep and clear understanding, but not so full of information that you don't have time to ask questions. And I will say that the process of you submitting questions in writing and us identifying what topics and tasks or information you need that rise up out of the subcommittee level, just please keep sharing that with us and we'll return back as many times as we need to in order to cover those items. Okay.
All right, so good evening, everyone. My name is Lieutenant Turner, and I'm happy to be back to help support Lieutenant McGee and Chief Lewis on this presentation. A couple of the areas I'm going to cover right now are our recruiting efforts and our hiring efforts. Prior to being a lieutenant, I was our hiring sergeant, and so I can give you some perspective on my time, my 4.5 years working in hiring. And so I'm going to talk about some of the ways that we try to find qualified candidates here at Berkeley PD, and then I'll walk you through the hiring process. It is a lot of information, and so hopefully I kind of condense it down so that it's not too much to take in tonight. Please, if you have questions, please write those down and we can answer those at the end. So here we go. So the way we start our process is by having a job posting on the City of Berkeley website, and that is something that we coordinate with our Human Resources Department at the City of Berkeley, and the job will post on the city website. Typically in a normal year, we would post the job for an entry-level officer 2 to 3 times per year. And each time it's posted, it will be open for about 4 weeks or so. People can submit an interest card with the city anytime throughout the year, even if the job is not open. They can submit an interest card, and so that when the position does open, they will be notified that they can apply. So the next thing would be that we try to stay focused on, of course, is really trying to find and identify folks from our own city. And so a lot of the events that we try to recruit from and that we do recruit from are events here in Berkeley. So for instance, we will stay focused on doing events such as Solano Stroll and Juneteenth and the 4th of July event down in the marina. We will also try to find other events here in the city where we feel like folks that come to those events are going to be folks that are interested in working here at Berkeley PD. Another area that we like to participate in is doing on-campus job fairs. So we'll go and find schools that are going to have job fairs, whether it's general job fairs or law enforcement specific. Here at Berkeley City College, UC Berkeley, Merritt, Laney, schools like that, Cal State East Bay, and we've gone as far as San Jose State, UC Santa Cruz, things like that. We really try to hit all the main schools here in the Bay Area. Special events, as I mentioned, some of the ones are here in Berkeley, but we've also attended. We go and recruit every year at San Francisco Pride Parade. We'll go there for Saturday and Sunday every year. And we do UC Berkeley sporting events. And we also do other job fairs. So not just folks that are interested in law enforcement, but someone who has a different background than law enforcement who may be interested in being a police officer here as well. Another way we like to recruit is we will participate in community presentations, and we've done that a number of times. We get asked to present in different panels. For instance, I've spoken at different schools as for women that are interested in law enforcement. We've also had requests from other groups within our community to come and speak about what it's like to be a police officer, and we often will use that as a way to recruit people as well. Another way we find good candidates is just hear from our own city staff. We always ask other city staff to refer people that they know that they think would be good police officers here to us, and also we'll ask our own employees if you think someone would understand and be motivated to be a police officer, and you think they would be a good fit here at Berkeley, then definitely send them our way. And lastly, social media. Social media, we have a Join Berkeley PD Instagram page, Facebook page, and we often will use Nixle and other social media platforms to show that we are going to have a job opening. All right, so our hiring process. Our hiring process is very in-depth, and so I'm going to try to cover these. Each of these we're going to kind of go over from beginning to end through the whole process, and we'll talk a little bit about sort of that timeline later on in the presentation. So the first thing, as I mentioned, is the application. When we have an open application period, applicants go online, will submit their application on the City of Berkeley website. In order to apply, you have to meet our minimum qualifications, which is to have a high school, graduate from high school or equivalent, and have 60 college units, so an AA degree or more, and have to have a driver's license, etc. The next thing that they would need to submit to us is a personal history statement. So one thing to kind of go back a little bit is the personal history statement is something that is created by the California Commission on Police Officer Standards and Training. That is a state agency that sets the minimum hiring and training guidelines for the state. And so a lot of the areas that I'm going to cover now are mandated or managed by post. So personal history statement is one of those. The personal history statement is a information packet that the candidate will submit to us that will cover their entire history up until that point, including things like their references, their education, their driving, any criminal history, things like that. So the first actual step in the process in terms of exam is the written exam, and the applicants will take what is called the Pellet B exam. That is a post exam, and really what the purpose of the exam is to determine their reading and writing capabilities. That's the main point of the exam there. Physical ability, each candidate has to pass a physical ability exam that is a minimum exam that would determine that they most likely would be able to make it through a police academy type setting. The next one is, so the oral boards, once the candidate passes the written exam and the physical ability exam, they would come and do the oral board here at the police department. That oral board process consists of 3 police officers within the department here, all supervisors or field training officers. And we come up with a set of questions. Usually the interviews are about 30 minutes. And those are going to cover certain areas that post has required us to cover. So what we're looking for is the candidate's experience, their ability to problem solve, their communication skills, their interest and motivation in doing law enforcement, their interpersonal skills, and their community involvement and awareness as it pertains to Berkeley specifically. And so those are the areas that they are evaluated on during that oral board process. If the candidate is recommended to move forward in the process and does pass the oral board, then they would come and meet with the hiring sergeant or someone else in our hiring team and do what we call the pre-investigative interview. This process includes going over all the documentation that they would need to submit for a background check, and also going over their personal history statement in depth with them to determine if they would be a candidate that is qualified to move forward in the process. So next is the background process, and this is the part of the hiring process that typically takes 2 to 3 months, depending on the applicant's age and prior life experience. And in this background, our background investigator is going to be verifying the information that they shared with us in the personal history statement, and they're going to be looking to speak to their family, their friends. They'll be going to do a check in the neighborhood to speak to their neighbors, to speak to significant others, current and ex-significant others, like I think I said, education, etc. So we're really taking a deep dive into each candidate to determine if they would be a good fit to be in law enforcement, A, and B, to whether or not they would be a good fit here for us at Berkeley PD.
Mel, can I interrupt you real quick? Can you just share in the background the efforts are taken to look into, I know social media has come up a couple of times, but can you talk about that?
Yeah, absolutely. So social media is absolutely an area that the background investigator will cover. We always will check all the social media platforms that we're aware of and that we can have access to for every single candidate. That's always something that the investigator has to cover during the background process. Voice stress analysis, that is a way that we will, so you'll sometimes hear a polygraph. We here do the voice stress analysis. It's a way for us to determine if the candidate has been truthful with us, and to determine if there's been any areas where they've been deceptive, and that's what the purpose there of the voice stress analysis. So once that background is done and the voice stress analysis is done and completed, the hiring sergeant will receive a really substantial packet of this person, this candidate, and it goes through a review and recommendation process through our chain of command in hiring, which includes the sergeant, lieutenant, captain, and finally the chief reviews it to determine whether or not this person would be a good fit for a police officer here. And then finally, if the chief determines that they would like to interview the person, they will schedule them for an interview and give them a conditional offer. And that offer then hinges on whether or not the candidate passes a medical exam and also a psychological exam. There are doctors and psychologists who are post-verified that these candidates go to see those individuals in particular, and they have to pass both of those exams in order to then be hired and to go to the police academy.
I did ask for a minute to share here. I think it's important to talk a little bit about the opportunity that I have at the chief's level to do sort of that final interview where I make the determination as to whether or not I'm going to make a conditional job offer for a candidate. I do want to share that I have had what I consider the honor in the last couple months to have 4 of those chiefs interviews. And I think it's really important to share with this group. That is a kind of a free-flowing interview. It's an opportunity for me to hear perspectives from the candidate, to share with them the values of our community, the values of our department. And I will share with you that in all of those interviews, predominant questions on my part have revolved around that new officer's willingness and eagerness to engage in and understand the importance of not only the FIP recommendations, but the work of reimagining. That we are understanding that there is a significant change undergoing our profession, and that those of us who are coming to this profession and starting their careers need to understand sort of the importance and relevance of that work. And I think that's really important, and that's why it's an important part of the chief's interview, and I wanted to share that with this group.
All right, I'll take us through the academy. So the academy is the first step in the police profession after the person is hired here at Berkeley PD. The academies are established by post, and all of the material is in accordance with post guidelines. All the academies are a minimum of 664 hours. However, the academies that we send our people to are well over 1,000 hours on average. Within the academy, there are 43 post-learning domains that are tested on throughout the tenure of the academy. And I'll just read to you some of those topics that are covered that I won't cover further in this are the following: critical incidents, domestic violence, victimology, laws of arrest, search and seizure, investigative report writing, how to handle crimes in progress, how to work with people with disabilities, and how to work with people in a culturally diverse way. As you see, one of the learning modalities is lecture. The academy is based in the classroom, and the lecture sessions are taught by people affiliated with the host academy and or other experts within the field of that particular subject matter. The physical abilities of the recruit are also tested on a regular basis. Physical abilities are all those things that you would typically think about that you pretty much see officers doing in the field. So such as driving, firearms, handcuffing, learning how to use the radio, and now learning how to manipulate the body-worn camera in certain situations. Scenarios are a huge part of the academy. We can learn in a classroom environment, but we understand that it has to be applied in as close to a real world situation as possible. So those situations are mimicked at the academy through scenarios. A lot of the scenarios are using people from the community who are volunteering their time to participate in the scenarios, so we can get a realistic feel as possible in that training environment. The scenarios test everything that's learned within the classroom setting. So we have seen that some people can really learn in the classroom, but it's more difficult to apply it out in that physical setting. So those scenarios are designed to get us to think on our feet and apply the material that's learned within the lecture setting. Each of the scenarios is also graded by experts within the field. So either officers that are currently working with the host agency or that may have retired from the host agency and are experts in that particular subject matter. They are there watching how the officer is interacting and then giving that immediate feedback. If the officer needs to redo a scenario, that's also offered during that time. Character is a huge part of the profession, so it's analyzed throughout the academy. And I think it's important to note that it's not only analyzed by the instructors, but it's also analyzed by your peers. There's learning domains such as ethics, professionalism, and leadership that are actually taught from the book. However, if you don't put those into practice, then you will be called upon by the instructors, by your peers. The peers vote on leaders within the academy, and so you're continually being assessed for how you are performing and the display of your character as you move through the weeks. Next up is the criminal justice. Obviously, that's a large part of the academy. We work from the constitutional applications of law enforcement, so we get an understanding of the Fourth Amendment, the Fifth Amendment, the First Amendment, the Sixth Amendment, for example. But then we also get deep dive understanding of the California criminal justice system and probation, parole, how the systems work, how they're county-based, how most agencies are city jurisdictions. They might be county jurisdictions, sheriff's departments, but we learn what happens at the front of the law enforcement system where we are at, but also as somebody moves through the system, what is happening? Where does that case go? Where does the individual go? And the impact that the criminal justice system has on the individual, their family, and the community. And so one of those tenets, as we understand the criminal justice system, is understanding principled policing. It's talked about in the academy. It's actually a learning domain in the academy. And it's understanding each and every person's implicit bias. It's understanding where policing has the role of policing in the history of this country, and maybe even specifically in the history of this state. Some of the tenets of principled policing are allowing a voice to the community, allowing a voice to the person that you're interacting with, neutrality on the behalf of the officer, and then respect and trustworthiness between the officer and the individual that they might be dealing with. Crisis intervention. Crisis intervention is first introduced at the academy level. I believe it's a 4-hour block within the academy, and it's there to lay the foundational work of what crisis intervention work is, so that when you get back to your department, you will be, that foundation will be expanded upon in the FTO program and throughout your career. And then lastly, lifetime fitness. We understand that for us to be at our best, we need to take care of ourselves so that we can take care of the community. The academy is very heavy on physical fitness, but there's also the understanding that you need to, there's many components of physical fitness: taking care of yourself, getting the right sleep, eating correctly, and mentally taking care. One of the 21st century policing tenets is wellness of officers. So there's been a huge focus on lifetime fitness, and really not just maintaining that fitness at one point of your career, but expanding it through the length of your career so you can have a successful career and be the best for your department, but also for your community.
Thanks, Matt. Can you still hear me okay? I lost my sound for a second. Yeah? Okay, great. So once that academy training is completed and that lengthy training is completed, then officers return to our city, to our department. That's when our training begins. And our training comprises of a field training program that's instructed by field training officers. What's important to note is that there's a selection process and a training process for individual officers to become field training officers. They also must undertake a 40-hour training course that covers not only how to teach adult learning styles, but also the importance of strong evaluation, modeling, strong behavior, and really instilling a really good foundation. So as we've moved through this process to this point, we've been trying to lay a really important foundation for them to then learn how this work's completed in Berkeley so that they can function as a solo officer. So the 4 phases and the overall goal of the training program is to produce competent officers that can apply what they've learned in the academy into a real world setting. It's meant to be a standardized way of training. Post sets guidelines for those trainings in order to ensure that there's clear standards, there's rating, there's evaluation, things don't get missed that need to be trained on, tested on, and explained to new officers. With the stated goal of trying to enhance professionalism, job skills, and ethical standards within the entire law enforcement community. Now, those 4 phases span a period of at a minimum 16 weeks, with the first phase being an orientation phase. And this is really an opportunity for the officers to become familiar with the city itself, to pass some minimum competency requirements so that we can assure that what they learned in the academy, that the minute they have a Berkeley police uniform on and step out into the community, that we know they have a minimum level of competency in their driving, in their firearms use, and the use of the less lethal tools that they carry on their belt. And so the orientation phase is also an opportunity for them to just sort of get oriented with the city itself. That orientation phase is followed by distinct training phases. There's 3 phases of training that are then followed by a final phase where it's an evaluation period, where they will be performing as a solo officer while they are being observed by a field training officer in plain clothes, who will only step in and provide guidance or feedback to that officer if there's an officer safety issue, a criminal or a community safety issue, or some violation of the law that's occurring. So during these 4 phases, the officer is getting daily evaluation and feedback. Again, this is written feedback. This is completed by the field training officer. This is a scored evaluated sections that the officer gets feedback on, verbal feedback, instructional feedback, training is applied if it needs to be applied. And then those daily evaluations are also reviewed through the field training program chain of command, which includes a sergeant and a lieutenant who is in charge of the entire field training program. Now, in order to move from one of the FTO phases to another, there's also an end of phase evaluation. And what that happens during that phase is during each individual phase, a different field training officer is providing their experience and their training to that officer, so that every new officer is exposed to multiple learning styles and multiple perspectives. And a end of phase report is completed and passed to the next training officer, so that if there's issues that are beginning to arise, they don't fall off of our tracking. If there's areas that need additional training, we're aware of them, we're monitoring them, and we know what we've tried and what's working. And as they travel through the entirety of the field training program, they will be using what's called an FTO manual. And that manual encompasses all of the competencies that are required in order to clear the training program. They're required to go over all of those items with their training officer to sign off on them, that they've either practically done those live in the field, or if that opportunity didn't present itself, that they've been able to walk through or talk through a scenario for that training. And kind of the best way to sort of understand the way that the phases work is that in the first phase of training, what you're mostly doing is observing the field training officer do the job. That field training officer is modeling how in Berkeley you handle a call for service, how you manage a scene, how you treat our community with dignity and respect, how you properly apply the laws that you use. Slowly during that training phase, they will hand off more and more responsibility to the officer. And at which point, after approximately 4 weeks of training, they can move to the second phase. And in that second phase, again, they're handling more calls for service. There's less and less input, but there's still a lot of guidance and feedback happening on a regular basis. And officers are beginning to master the skills they must know. We're also looking to see whether that skills about leadership and community engagement are starting to rise up, and we're being sure to monitor and provide learning opportunities for that. And then in the final third phase of training, we're exposing them to more and more critical incidents, having them handle calls on their own with less and less support, and just mostly feedback and guidance on the back end, or immediate review right after the call by their FTO. And once they've met that competency level in the third phase, they then move to a final phase where they're evaluated. And I will share that while the minimum amount of time it takes is up to 16 weeks, based on the concept that the orientation phase is 1 to 2 weeks. Each of those first 3 phases is 4 weeks, followed by a 2-week final evaluation phase. We don't release people to the next phase of training until they are competent in that phase level of training. And the daily observation reports cover the items that you'll see next. So officer safety, driving, case call management, report writing. Those are some of the key components to the phases of training and the evaluation. But I did also want to very specifically share sort of the required categories that exist in the daily observation reports, because I think it's really important to hear and understand those. Those are the things that they're graded on daily, and if they don't aren't able to achieve competency in those things, they can't move forward. The first is attitude, and that's ethics, leadership, and overall attitude towards policing and the community. The next is appearance, and that's how they carry themselves, whether they are professional, whether they treat people professionally. The next category is relationships, and that has to do with their ability to not only be reflective and engage with the community and treat their community well and build those relationships, but also with our coworkers. And as it's the same in the academy, officers hold those new officers to the standards and call out when they're not living up to the performance standards that we expect of them. Another piece of the relationship that's very strong is community engagement and problem solving is specifically called out as a reviewed and tested category in that. The other two remaining categories that are on the daily evaluations are performance, and that's their overall performance with stress, with driving, with handling calls, with scene management, but it's also decision making. And we also review self-initiated activity. And that's just not to see that they are engaging in proactive crime prevention efforts, but that they are learning and understanding the way that you, with dignity and respect, engage in self-initiated activities. And then the knowledge portion of the daily observation reports has to do with those department-specific and California-specific laws and policies that we follow. What is most important and valuable about us doing our training, this field training in our city, it's an opportunity for us to share our core values and instill a foundation, a profession-long foundation of our core values in all of our officers. And I did feel it's really important to call out what our core values are for you. And those core values are integrity, that we're ethical, fair, and trustworthy. It's safety, that we keep not only each other, but our community safe. Respect, that we fulfill our duties with dignity, compassion, and empathy. Diversity, that we value the strength of a diverse workplace and community, and that we reflect the community we serve, promoting inclusion and fairness. And professionalism, and that is we have organizational excellence through our progressive training, positive attitude, and superior performance. So it's really having ensuring that our officers meet those core values in all of these other pieces of the things that they do that's critical to our officers. Now, we've talked a lot about the ways that you transition through this hiring and training process, and really wanted to, we have these conversations about hiring and staffing and all that. And I really wanted to kind of lay this out here for you so that you understand each of these arrows represents one of the slides we talk about. As you saw, recruiting is an ongoing activity. Hiring can take several months to complete the background process. And so what we've provided here are some dates. Like, for example, if we began the hiring practice here in May of 2021, that person would be through all of those steps of the hiring, that scrutiny and hiring. They would start an academy in November of 2021. That academy would take 6 months, and they would come here and start our training program, which would take them to not becoming a solo officer, assuming that they made it through in a typical amount of time in the training program. They would not become a solo officer until September of 2022. So you can look at the difference between May to September. And really that, I think, highlights not only the importance of the quality of the scrutiny that we apply during our evaluation for hiring, but also the amount and level of training that these officers receive in the academy and in our community before we release them to become solo officers to perform their duties in the street. And I know there were some questions last time about how well we reflected our community. So we pulled together some of this information. And so we've looked at our community based on community survey information and tried to compare how our numbers are compared to that. And then I'm also wanted to share how we compare in relation to gender. Certainly it is very important for us to reflect our community. We've made a lot of efforts to really focus recruiting in those areas and hiring in those areas. And I do actually want to have Lieutenant Turner share a little bit about some of the struggles we've experienced trying to ensure that more women come to this profession.
Yeah, certainly, as you see there, we're at 16% right now. That number has kind of gone up and down over the years, and historically, I'm sure some people here won't be surprised to hear that it can be challenging to identify and find women that are interested in doing this profession. I've talked to many over the years, folks that I either know personally or met through events that we've recruited at, and there's a hesitancy there, or a concern that maybe they didn't feel physically like they could do it, or emotionally like they could handle it, or a variety of things I've heard from different women. And so we've, and me personally, I've been challenged to be able to show some women that they really can do it, and that we're here, and that we're able to do the job, and we'd love to have them. And that's was my own personal goal when I was in hiring, to be able to find those women. And we'll continue to try to find ways, and certainly if there are ways this task force could suggest ways that we could find really great women for this department, we would love to hear it. And so just kind of wanted to share that that having been in hiring, that was something that we struggled with sometimes. But to also add that, anytime we have a woman that applies, we really try to identify those strong candidates and make sure that we try to get them through the hiring process as quickly as possible.
I'm going to go into a little bit more in depth on the specific trainings that we receive once we are here at the department. So one of the ones that's talked about a lot is crisis intervention training. So we have a crisis intervention team. It's outlined in our General Order C66. And it talks about teaching officers about mental illness, about people who are in crisis, and in particular, suicide intervention. It also discusses some common psychiatric medications that we may encounter in the field. And also specifically speaks to crisis intervention for adolescents, while understanding different cultures that we may be interacting with in the community. Additionally, post-traumatic stress disorder. We know that there's traumas that are experienced within the community by our community members, and how we approach those situations and work with people who have experienced trauma and may be exhibiting behaviors that are related to their traumas, and how we can best intervene in a way that reduces our use of force in situations like that. On scene, and this is actually a picture of a scene that occurred here in the city, we are continually assessing for safety of the community, safety of the individual, safety of the officer. We're always doing assessments. If there's weapons involved, we are going to take our time, use distance. As you see in this picture, officers have cordoned off the area. We've provided a ladder to the individual who's in the middle of a crisis. And we're going to try to treat the whole situation with dignity and respect to bring it to the safest possible resolution. I think one of the main tenets that we learn is to meet the client where they are at. When we're interacting with someone, we want to meet the person where they are at, and then try to talk with them and bring them to a safe resolution, or as safe of an intervention that we can. With crisis intervention, we're trained to work with our mobile crisis team. I think we have a great relationship with them, and we really work with each other and assist each other in coming up with the best resolution for the client. Additionally, youth crisis intervention. I myself, a lot of my experience has been working with the youth in the community. I was a school resource officer for 5 years, and having an understanding and recognizing when a youth who may have experienced a traumatic situation in the community is coming to school and having the quote unquote bad day, and understanding where that trauma is coming from, and that it's not necessarily a criminal or law enforcement intervention that's going to rectify the situation, but rather bringing the youth who's in crisis to the services that the city offers. So for example, at the high school, having the SRO on campus and understanding where the resources are, the resources that are in the health center, we can bring the youth over to a mental health clinician and get those services needed, thereby eliminating the interaction with law enforcement, but also providing for safety of the youth and the rest of the school community. So that kind of goes into the community resources. that's a great example, one of the community resources that we use on a regular basis. A lot of officers have great connections with the mental health team from Health and Human Services. We have cell phone numbers of the providers within the community. We have other resources such as at the Parks program or at BYA, and we're going to make those referrals as often as we can. We're going to give the referrals to the community member or maybe even to a family member of the person that we're working with. We're going to have that communication. We're going to, when we can, communicate with other support systems of the individual to make sure that the proper interventions are always there in the immediacy, but also for the long term. So almost like that case management, that's in play so that the recidivism of that person is negated as best as possible.
Matt, were you able to talk about some statistics about how many of our officers have been CIT trained, or do you want me to cover that?
I have that here. I can mention that. Let me just pull it up really quick. So we have, there are varying CIT trainings. We have 116 employees who have gone through the 8-hour CIT course. We have 13 employees who have gone through the 16-hour course. And we have 50 employees who have received the 32+ hour course. And then every officer, as I mentioned previously, has received the 4-hour training in the academy. And
yeah, I think sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, and additionally, that's a combination of officers, but also dispatchers. So the dispatchers who may be receiving that initial crisis call are trained in crisis intervention as well.
Yeah, and I just kind of wanted to fill into, I know we get a lot of questions about how much CIT training we have, and I wanted to share, well, those numbers that Matt is providing are the courses that we've taken that are only identified as CIT classes. CIT training is embedded in other training topics in the academy, including the people with disabilities block. It's included in the scenario-based training that they complete. So they are required to practice what they learn in the area of CIT as part of their scenarios in the academy. We often send officers to classes on other subject matter where CIT topics are interwoven into those trainings. So we are always focused on increasing the CIT specific training, but also attending classes that sort of even expand on those pieces as in the ways that they interplay with other trainings.
And finally, to touch on some of the other trainings that we've had that really focus on, dignity and respect within our community and with our community members. These are trainings that we've done over the years that touch on understanding our bias, understanding approaching folks with dignity and respect, neutrality, how to build trust with our community. Some of the trainings that you'll see here include fair and impartial policing. That was a training that all the department went through. Post has a training course titled Bias-Based Policing, Remaining Fair and Impartial. That was a post class. We've had principled policing. We've also had, can you click the next one there, Chief? Tactical de-escalation, how to approach situations dealing with non-compliant individuals that don't have weapons, and how to work through some of those types of situations. Subjects armed with weapons and also subjects who made attempt suicide by cop. Harassment prevention is a class that everyone here is required to go through by the city. As an officer, and also supervisors have a class that they're required to take as well. And then as Lieutenant McGee and the Chief mentioned, crisis intervention.
Yeah, and I think just to reiterate, these are some of those courses that are specifically titled in a way that covering these topics, the implicit bias courses that we've taken and all the work around this, but often, fortunately and importantly, these topics are interwoven in many of the other trainings and conferences that we all attend on a regular basis. So again, I promise we'll keep coming back as often as we need to. We'll answer questions tonight. I will share that if the question is about something not related to this, in the interest of time, it might make more sense to just submit those in writing so that we can make sure we come back and talk to them in depth. I know I have some questions that Task Force Member Lindheim presented, and we will get to those, I promise, in our presentations. We are back next week to talk about our implementation update on the Fair and Impartial Policing Task Force recommendations. But again, we're happy to answer any questions now and to keep coming back as often as we need to.
Thank you. Commissioner Fine?
Thank you very much. You know, I am keenly interested in how you make outreach to specific populations that are underrepresented in police force. And, you know, my antenna got up because even when I looked at your map with the diversity, it had a female male split, which doesn't really allow for gender expression or identity.
Right.
And there were no LGBT statistics. But a meeting ago, I also remember when we talked about this, because there was a death in custody, Commissioner Dangerfield, who I believe is a criminal defense attorney, brought up the fact that we found out there was no transgender officer, and potentially, now you'll have to correct me if I'm wrong, no policy about interacting with transgender folks. So I'm like kind of wondering with the LGBT community and this kind of situation where things are at.
So we will come back and talk specifically about the policies we have that touch on transgender issues and treating all parties that we deal with dignity and respect, including recognizing that the people have a choice to identify the way they see fit, and to respect the way that people identify. I think I shared last time, and I'll share again. We don't regularly post data about our officers' identification, their orientation or identification, because not everyone feels comfortable reporting that, you know, in a public way that's then going to be identified in that manner. So we could potentially ask people how they would like to be identified if we were to take a poll, but that's just not typically something we do. We treat and we have had transgender employees in the past, and we treat them and identify them in the way that they identify themselves. And it is people's right whether they want to be public in their identification or whether they choose to pass however society identifies them, if that makes sense. I'm sure it does. So that's why you won't sometimes see those statuses in the demographics that we produce, because we don't want to be inaccurate with our statistics either.
Commissioner Harger?
Thank you. I have a number of questions, and if the chair is amenable, I'd like to ask them in succession. Is that okay?
Yes, that's fine.
Thank you. So my first question is, we recently had the city auditor come and present, and one of the things in the presentation that really stuck with me is that there's a striking disparity in how people of different races are treated by BPD. So I would like to hear what you guys are doing to address that. And that's my first question.
Okay, so we do have a plan to come back, not next meeting, but the meeting after that, and talk about that in great depth. So I'd like to save that until that time. We will get to that, and we'll talk at depth about that, and hopefully have a really long, productive conversation around it.
All right, thank you. My second question is perhaps something that you want to come back to later, but I think in these discussions, we often have an assumption that people listening have the same understanding and knowledge that we do about policing. So I think it would probably be really helpful for lay people, I myself am also a lay person, to hear what exactly it is that beat policing does. We know that Berkeley has many beats, and I'd like to hear what exactly is it the officers do when they're beat policing, and how does that concretely benefit our community, if it does?
That's a great question. And my commitment to you all is that when you leave this task force, you are no longer laypersons in this work, that you are fluent in all things related to this, and have developed that. We're going to keep coming back until you feel comfortable in that. And I will share that one of the topics we'll be returning back on is covering exactly that question about beat policing. We'll be talking about how our resources are allocated to certain beats, This is in line with some of the questions that Task Force member Lindheim brought in writing to us. We'll talk about why we put people where we put her and why we staff our beats in those ways, and what that's intended to cover and how that whole system works. And also potentially talk about some different alternatives to that as well.
Thank you. This is a question that I believe a couple of other commissioners have. We discussed it in a subcommittee. The City Council, as we all know, voted to attempt to reduce the police department by a goal of 50%. So I'd like to hear what your department is doing to move towards that goal.
So with that same conversation around the beat policing, we'll be talking about our budget, and we'll really identify what pieces of our budget cover what, so that as this task force does its work, it identifies the things that it wants to make recommendations on. It understands where that funding could and could not come from, depending on the interests of the task force, if that makes sense.
It does make sense. Thank you.
Great.
And these next 3 questions are a little bit more directed towards your presentation, so hopefully that's helpful. Question 4 being, how many officers are currently involved in the recruitment process or the recruitment development?
Right. So we, in 2018, I believe, recognized that we were having a significant staffing crisis. We staffed a full-time recruitment team that was led by 2 sergeants and 2 officers. And that team was able to go out with the assistance of several other dispatchers, knowing that we had dispatcher shortages, also with other officers that were interested in this work that reflected our department and the diversity of the communities we were trying to engage in, that had connections to student groups or other groups that we were, had been impacted and they were connected to. Since we have our staffing numbers reduced again, we no longer have that team staffed up. Those bodies have been moved to cover patrol vacancies, but we still actively do recruitment through our personnel and training division, which is the unit that Lieutenant Turner used to be part of. So now there's a Sergeant Jung, who manages that recruitment. So we no longer have full-time employees engaged in that.
Got it. Thank you. And then my final question is, and I'm sure you are very well aware of this, but some people in our audience may not be. So in January of this year, a man named Vincent Bryant was shot through the mouth and narrowly missed death during a mental health crisis in Berkeley, shot by BPD. And you spoke to your crisis intervention training. So I'd like to hear what you believe went wrong that allowed this man to be shot, or if you don't think that something went wrong, I'd like to know what crisis intervention is actually for. Because in my opinion, that was a crisis, and I don't think that we got a good result, given he had to have multiple surgeries and is still now recovering.
I understand a desire to have more information and clear answers on that incident. I can tell you that I've reviewed preliminarily the information that's been received of that. I have not been able to review a completed investigative packet on the administrative process yet. So I haven't seen the full breadth of all the information in there. So I don't feel comfortable making a judgment call on what went right and what went wrong without having the opportunity to review all of the materials surrounding that. I do know I'm hoping to receive that in the next couple of weeks and be able to move through that review of that and can speak more on it at that time.
Okay, and to follow up on that, Alameda County has approximately a 40-hour crisis intervention training. And I was wondering if anybody in BPD has taken that training, and if not, why?
That, I think what you're referring to is that is actually a 32-hour when it was actual credit hours. Many of our officers went through that when Oakland Police Department was staffing that and running that training. They are, to my understanding, no longer running that specific training. There's not a local agency running that 32-hour block. So what we're doing is looking for locations that we can get officers to attend additional CIT training. We were able to accomplish some of that training in-house. We have post-certified instructors on those subject matters in-house that can do that training. We have been struggling with training at, like most other agencies during COVID. A lot of trainings were canceled and are beginning to be staffed up via Zoom and things like that. But training on CIT remains a priority for us, and we continue to track the hours that officers are getting.
Thank you. And I'll be sending more questions to you guys shortly.
Great.
Commissioner Lindheim. Commissioner Lindheim.
Thank you. I had a couple of questions. I wasn't expecting to be talking about training tonight, but in any case, what most people who I've spoken to about police training argue is the two most important spots are the hiring sergeant and the FTOs. And the problems that a lot of other departments have had is the people who get selected to be the hiring sergeants and the people who get selected to be the FTOs are people who are really trying to perpetuate themselves or the people who they feel are good cops. And many people who don't fit the criteria of the FTO or who don't fit the criteria, particularly of the hiring sergeant, never get a chance to be an officer. And many of the people who don't even get to the academy in other departments, or some who fail out of the academy, do so because they're not really in the image of, let's just say, the old guys and primarily guys in other departments. And so what do you do to ensure that your FTOs are not Derek Chauvin, who is an FTO or was an FTO? What do you do to ensure that the people who are the FTOs really demonstrate the best of the new parts of the department that you all aspire to, as opposed to, let's say, older perceptions of what policing was about? So if you could speak to the issue of FTOs and of how you select the hiring sergeants, that I think that would be helpful. And then I have a couple more questions.
Yeah, I would love to. Those are really great questions. I think I'm going to start first with the hiring sergeant. Just kind of, I think would make the most sense. And just to be clear, the hiring sergeant, while they supervise recruiting efforts, they oversee the implementation of the whole hiring process. There are many checks and balances along the way to ensure that many different people talk to applicants. Different people do the oral board, then do the physical agility exams, then do the background process, and all those things are handled by different people. And there's a review process. The sergeant doesn't have a power to stop an applicant from moving forward through all those levels of review. So that's one way that we ensure that it reflects sort of an overall departmental vision. The overall departmental vision being that we are a diverse, inclusive department that reflects our community and reflects our community's values. In order to become the hiring sergeant, you have to be selected for that assignment. It means that the job gets opened and there's an application period with often an interview and a review process where they participate in an interview. Their prior special assignments are reviewed, their work ethic and their performance during their time as other roles as sergeant are reviewed. Their discipline record is reviewed to see if there's anything concerning in that. And then ultimately, when a selection is identified or desired, that selection goes through the captain of that division and to not only all the other captains, but myself to review to make sure that person is the right person for the job. So those are the kind of the checks and balances we have to ensure that hiring sergeant is the right person that exemplifies not only our training program goals, but also the vision of our department. As far as our FTOs, and I'm sorry if I didn't hit this in more depth when I was talking about the FTOs. So they are also selected through an interview process, a hiring process, and we look at the same exact things. Do they have ongoing or repeated discipline that shows issues with exemplifying our values, our departmental policies? Do they have a strong work ethic? Do they show leadership? Do they show the ability to train? Do they represent our values? And once they move through an interview process, again, the same thing happens. If they're selected or the FTO program wants to select them, they have to make all the way through the captain level to the chief's review to ensure that those candidates are qualified candidates. They then have to go to a 40-hour post-training to learn how to complete quality evaluations, how to do adult learning, and how to ensure that not only are they exemplifying our values, but they're holding themselves, not only when they're actually training, but in all times as an example of our best. I will say the worst part of the field training program is only that they are some of our best. And as a result, they often end up in special assignments or being promoted to sergeant and above because they are our best. And so there's some turnover that happens in our FTO program just because that's what rises into our program. It's often a stepping stone to get into higher level supervision because you are exemplifying leadership and our values.
Thank you. I will not be recognizing hands that are up for the second time in this discussion. So let's go to Commissioner Lisa Lutzker, and then Francis Ho, and then I think I see Mr. Garcia. Okay. So Lisa.
Co-Chairperson Chima, if I could be placed on that list, this is Commissioner Dangerfield. I would appreciate that.
Are you asking to have your hand up? Got it.
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you.
Of course.
Thank you, Vice Chair Chima. I also have a number of questions that I'd like to ask. I think they're in 4 buckets. The first pertains to the academy. So one question I have is like, it sounded to me like we don't run the academy ourselves, like that's something that we contract out or something. So I guess my questions in this bucket are, who runs the academy that BPD goes to? Do Berkeley taxpayers pay for the training that our recruits go into the academy for? How does BPD select which academy we send these folks to? Do we have any input into the curriculum of the academy? So that's the first kind of bucket of questions.
Absolutely. I think there was some discussion last year. Councilmember Bartlett asked the same question about, I think it was Bartlett, about standing up our own academy. I will share that it's extremely expensive. Lieutenant McGee talked about all the different subject matter experts that do each of the individual blocks of training. We typically only have 3 or 4 recruits at most going through at a time in an academy. So if you can kind of understand like having either our officers train and the overtime and costs associated with that, or hiring experts to come in and train in that kind of cycle for those few people, and also having access to a firing range, a driving course, all those other pieces that are part of the training, the scenario instructors, the trained evaluators, things like that. It's cost prohibitive to do that, especially with how we're currently staffed. But we do use post-certified academies locally. We've identified academies that the officers who come back to us, having attended those academies, really sort of being ready to step into the work that we do, exemplifying our values, exemplifying just good leadership and ethics. Those are academies we continue to use on a regular basis. Sacramento Police Department is one of those academies. The Alameda County Sheriff's Department runs an academy that's local. And you asked about funding. So when we give a job offer to an officer and send them to an academy, they receive recruit officer pay during the time that they are under employment attending the academy, and we do pay for their academy attendance. And I'm sorry, was there another question?
Yeah, so I guess so there's not one single academy. That they can go to multiple ones. And the question is, do we have any input into the training curriculum at these academies?
Yeah, we usually have to reserve spots in academies. So a lot of times the agencies that have academies like Sacramento PD or there's an academy down in the Santa Clara area, they usually reserve that for their own agencies. And then they'll have a couple extra spots available that other agencies can come and join in that academy, if that makes sense. And I'm actually going to pass to Lieutenant Turner on to talk a little bit about how they interact with the academy during that time. And she can speak firsthand about that as she's had experience in it.
Yeah, so we do regular in-person visits to the academies, and we make sure that the academy staff understands what we're looking for in our recruits, and we get regular feedback from the academy on how our recruits are doing, and they do have to do some of the training that obviously the academy has, but if there are certain areas that we're interested in following and seeing how they're doing, the P&T sergeant will communicate with the staff about that, and we'll go and visit the academies and make sure we're seeing in person how our recruits are doing. We'll attend scenario trainings to make sure, again, that we're seeing in person how they're doing, and we have regular communication with the staff about how our folks are doing in the academy.
Okay, that's helpful. So the second bin of questions kind of overlaps with the academy, but also the BPD training specifically. So I guess a question is just overall through the training period, one of the things that was highlighted in the Nick Jr. report was the cultivation of a guardian versus a warrior mentality. And I guess I'm just wondering how we monitor whether that's happening at the academy, what is done around that in our actual BPD training, what's done in terms of the scenarios. Are the scenarios that are run at the academy very focused on cultivating this warrior mentality? Or is it focused on guardian? And can we say don't go to the academies where it's a warrior mentality? And then kind of more broadly about the Nick Jr. report, they highlighted a number of kind of model trainings that are done across the country. And I'm wondering specifically whether within the BPD training, whether you all adopt any of the trainings that are called out in the report. So I guess the question is, assuring guardian versus warrior mentality, looking at how the scenarios are run, and then also like whether the trainings in the Nick Jr. report are at all incorporated into your training.
Yeah, let me try to wrap up as much as those I can. Certainly the concept of service to our community, to having the standards of protecting and serving and treating our community with dignity and respect wrap into the guardian model versus the warrior model. The scenario, and that's part of what's critical to our core values in what we train and model for recruits in our training program. In the academy, the scenarios, just to be kind of clear, are situational based. And so, like, for example, you have to deal with someone who's in crisis. There's no crime involved in a scenario, and an officer has to is asked to respond to this person, and they don't, they're not told what they're going to get, and they will go up and connect with that person, and then their job is to identify that this isn't a crime, this is a person in crisis. I now have to provide services, and engage with them in that way. So that's sort of like testing their ability to transition from going to respond to a crime where something might be happening to transition into a problem-solving model of addressing what's actually needed on the scene and applying that. A scenario might be about responding to an incidence of a sexual assault and having to engage with a victim and understand ways to elicit information for a statement so that a case can be documented and an investigation can happen, but do so in a way that doesn't further victimize the victim, and ensures that he or she is treated with dignity or respect during that contact, and medical care is provided and things like that. So the scenarios are based in that sense. I don't know if that kind of covers that piece of it. And then I guess I know that there was material in the Nick Jr. report that talked about different trainings. I can talk how they're interwoven in some of our stuff. Sort of the FIP work is part of our training classes that we send people to in the CIT.
Sorry, what is FIP? I'm sorry.
I'm sorry, fair and impartial policing.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so it's challenging sometimes to we're often asked, how many classes have you done in X? And that's what I kind of was trying to drive to. How many classes have you done in CIT? How many hours of this thing do you have? And course titles are sort of adopted by post based on how someone presents a course to them. And it can get, numerous different names, but kind of encompasses a body of material. And so we kind of talk about FIP as fair and impartial policing as this material that's about implicit bias. It's about principled policing. It's about being fair and impartial. It's about being unbiased. It's kind of all wrapped together. And that's courses that we sort of have this philosophy in our department about training. And I don't want to get too deep into training, because we are going to come back and talk about sort of like the ongoing training that all of our officers get when we come back. But just kind of share with you that like sort of our philosophy is anyone that we have can bring forth a training to say they want to go to. And we will look at it and see how it overlays with our values, our expectations, our training goals, you know. So someone may find, hey, I found this really cool social work course on, you know, engaging with mentally ill. And it's like, if hey, it fits within our core values, our goals, you know, it fits within CIT, let's get you to that class. And hey, if it's great, let's get more people to it. That kind of like, that's our philosophy for training.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, just I think it would be helpful overall, and I don't know who would do this, maybe it would be Nick Jr., but to work with BPD to be very clear about which of the trainings that are, you know, model trainings that BPD is kind of already meeting and which ones are not. That would be helpful. My last two buckets are much shorter. So the third is just about when does response to traffic collisions happen, and how does that happen? How are officers trained, and who are they trained by? Are they trained by engineers who understand how traffic collisions happen, or is it other police officers? How are they trained to respond when a pedestrian or bicyclist has been hit and is unconscious, and the only person who is still conscious is the driver? Just if you could speak a little bit to that.
Yeah, so we have a traffic division currently, and they are the sort of the specialized unit that handles traffic investigations. But that's a limited team, and so all of our officers that work as part of their field training program learn how to take a basic traffic investigation. So a minor injury collision up to a more serious collision, they're trained in it. They know how to do it. So they will respond and handle those calls when there's no traffic division employee officer available, or when it's a lower level injury. Our traffic officers have a very, very high level of training in accident reconstruction, in assessing and documenting what happened. And then they're in communication with the Division of Transportation around, you know, some of the stuff that Division 0 works in, but about handling those investigations. And so if there's if an accident rises to the level of serious injury or death, unfortunately, we have what's called a fatal accident investigation team. They respond 24/7. They will come out and handle that investigation. That's who handled the investigation a couple days ago on Marin. And so they're trained in that. Our officers work closely with the fire department to ensure that adequate medical attention is given to individuals on scene for traffic accidents. But that's sort of the level of expertise it takes to investigate the very, very serious traffic accidents is something that requires many additional hours of training for competency.
Okay, and then last very short question, which is just the demographics slide. Were those the demographics for the entire department, or is that just sworn officers? Because we've been told, I've been told that the parking enforcement officers represent a very significant portion of BPD's racial diversity. And so I'm wondering whether that specifically the racial breakdown, but also the other breakdowns, whether that's all BPD or just sworn officers.
Yeah, sorry, I need to back up a minute. I recognize and remember from 2 or 3 meetings ago about the word collision versus the word accident. My apologies.
Thank you.
It's an old bad habit that it needs to be relearned, and I wanted to acknowledge and apologize for that. As far as the demographics, I believe those, and I will confirm, I believe those are sworn demographics. But I think you do raise important questions, and we will absolutely, when we come back again, return with broader demographics for our whole department. We do have that information. I think that for the purposes of this, we're focused on officers.
Okay, thank you.
Commissioner Francis Ho.
Yes, thank you. Actually, that's a perfect segue, because my quick question was exactly, I think, what the previous commissioner just spoke to, which is that I think, you know, many community members' experience with police is based on interactions with patrol officers. And so my question was going to be, is it possible to see a breakdown of race and gender by classification and possibly consistent with the organization chart that you gave us in April? I think that would be helpful. Just, I think it's important for us to understand what the face of BPD is as it, relates to the community.
Yeah, I would be happy to pull some of that together. I will caution that we are on a cycle of every 6 months. People can move to different special assignments out of patrol. And so we can fix a moment in time and provide statistics for that moment in time, but just know that there may be some inaccuracies in that as people move around a little bit. But we'll take a look at that. It'll take us a little bit just to kind of go through the chart and nail that down, but we can do that.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Commissioner Malvito?
Hi, thank you. I'll keep this really short. I just wanted to follow up on sort of the conversations about training and the academy and all that good stuff. I guess I wanted to ask, if there is an incident, if and when there's an incident of officer misconduct, or there's an open investigation for, improper use of force or anything like that, outside of evaluating and investigating the actual incident itself, can you identify if there is any correlation between that behavior and one, where they trained or / went to the academy, and two, what trainings they have had or have not had?
Yeah, I'm gonna promise to come back on that question. We're gonna have a whole session where we talk about sort of how we evaluate and regularly review the performance of our employees, and how we handle discipline and review discipline, how we have checks and balances, not only internally, but also with the Police Review Commission and the Police Accountability Board soon to be seated. So we will talk in depth about that. So I'm gonna ask to hold on that, and we will talk then about our early warning system and all those things. We'll have an opportunity to get really deep into that conversation.
Cool, thank you.
Commissioner Alex Diaz?
Yeah, so I just kind of, I guess, Hector Malvito kind of touched on some of the questions I had. But I was also going to ask, is it possible to have the breakdown of where the 1,000 hours go? What time is spent on each single item, or like things that you talked about, like, learning the law or learning tactics of, de-escalating situations and stuff, and just kind of break those down and kind of see, maybe where most of the hours are spent and what areas aren't maybe looked at as much?
Yeah, we can provide you the link to the post website, which actually identifies the required hours for each of those different subject matters. There's 43 different learning domains, and each of them have allocated hours. There's a certain amount of hours that are minimum hours to be spent on driving, firearm proficiency, and all those things. So we'll get that link and make sure it's shared with the group.
Okay, that's great. And then I had one other question is, do you know like what percentage of people that are hired are actually like recommended through your department as opposed to actual new hires that just, happen to apply randomly?
I know we probably don't have hard numbers on that. We might through our recruiting efforts, but I would say that the percentage of like direct referrals from internal employees is in the low percentages, like 1% to 2% maybe. We do get folks who come to us from other city staff, like who work in the city and other departments will sometimes refer people to us. Predominantly our recruiting efforts bring in candidates either from the recruitment fairs or the social media platforms. Lieutenant Turner, do you know, whether you could say that social media was the highest or something else was the highest, or is it just kind of be fairly evenly distributed?
Yeah, unfortunately, I can't speak on exact hard data on that.
Okay, and then you said you look at some concerning disciplines when you're looking at like whether people should get promoted or when they're being reviewed. What are concerning disciplines to you?
Yeah, and I think every complaint that's either generated internally and externally, and again, we'll talk about this in a lot of depth, so I'm going to try to hit it, answer your question, but not get too deep into it and have to explain too much at this point because we're going to get into it. But we have a set set of things that are considered very serious allegations that we investigate. That's discrimination and harassment, uses of force and things like that, that rise up to the highest level for us. Those would be things that would be preclusive to someone moving forward in a promotional process, or being somebody we identified as wanting them to be a field training officer. But sometimes things come in where there's, a discourtesy complaint. An interaction didn't go as well as it could have when someone's taking a report or dealing with something. And it might be an isolated incident that was closed out with an advice information to that officer. So while that's technically discipline, that wouldn't necessarily preclude them from being a good field training officer or eventually promoting that one outlier incident, if that's exactly what it was. But we would look and see whether that person had repeated offenses of that same thing. Then of course that becomes more concerning and something that would be someone we wouldn't want part of our training program.
Okay, thank you.
I promise we'll talk a lot more about this.
Yeah, no worries. That sounds good. All right, thank you for providing some brief information. And just a heads up, I'll be hopping off at 8. I have a couple of assignments due for finals.
David, was that of you saying? Was that you telling us that? Yeah, okay. I thought I saw Commissioner Ghosh's hand up before. Are you still there?
Yes, I had most of my questions answered, and I'm really interested when you come back on hearing about how you deal with understanding the effectiveness of these trainings, because I personally have had very mixed interactions with police that don't live up to the stated values. And I think generally we have a gap between stated values and what people actually experience on our streets. So I'm glad you're coming back, because I think that reflection and feedback is really critical. And I think I also just want to note for myself and for everybody else, when we hear training, we think trainings are good. But the kind of training, my experience with City of Berkeley and BPD training is around Urban Shield. And when you actually look at the content of that training, it's very troubling. So I guess my questions for you when you come back is, how does the City of Berkeley Police Department, which often is said to be better than other departments, how do you all navigate the training landscape that is offered to all departments? So how do you navigate that to make sure that it's meeting your needs, if you indeed are wanting to be or are seen to be better? Though I know that that can change depending on who you ask. And I think my very specific question was with the traffic collision training. Could you maybe send us by email who does that for you? I would like to know, like, where specifically you get that training. Who does that? Yeah, that's all I have for now. I'm not expecting answers today. I just wanted to put forward some framing, and when you come back, I would love to hear. And thank you for correcting yourself on collision. We really appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Commissioner Hyde.
Thank you, Chief, for spending so much time with us now, and for returning with, I'm sure, what will be very engaging conversations. My question is about retention, and how do you feel overall BPD does in terms of retaining good officers, and if those retention rates comparably to other police departments, if they're not great, or if they are especially great, what are the 2 or 3 factors that you feel plays into either losing more officers than we would like, or having hopefully a line out the door of folks coming to BPD?
Yeah, so I can't recall if I shared with this group some of our attrition information that we've seen annually. Certainly our entire profession has seen a reduction in candidates coming to this profession. It's been challenging to get the same kind of numbers we had in the past, where we really had the opportunity to ensure that we had really broad representation, and a very full applicant class to choose the best of the best from. We certainly are facing similar issues that other departments are about people leaving the profession as a whole and people leaving the profession to go to other departments. Sometimes that's directly connected to the cost of living in the Bay Area and the conditions in the Bay Area. We have officers that sometimes have to travel a distance because they can't afford to raise their family locally. And then we'll find agencies that are closer to where they live to work at. Being able to provide a steady salary is important to officers as well. And sometimes agencies offer lucrative signing bonuses if officers leave and transition to other departments. So certainly I know that not only are staffing numbers low right now compared to they have been in years past, due to some deferrals based on the pandemic and the budget, and this reimagining work preparing for not being quite sure where our staffing levels are going to go to. But we know we have several identified officers who have stated they are actively looking at other agencies to go to other agencies to work. And again, it's for a variety of reasons. We try very hard to retain people by understanding, trying to have conversations around why people might be trying to leave or wanting to leave, what we could do differently, and to do that, especially when we have quality employees that really exemplify our values.
And those factors that you just mentioned, those are generally true for both sworn and non-sworn officers, is that right?
I think that that is the case. We have never collected, or I don't know that we have collected in the same manner, the attrition rates for those other positions. I know for the dispatch, it gets a dispatch center that it mirrors much more closely with that. Same challenges for hiring, same things that drive people to not be able to stay. Yeah.
Great. Thank you very much.
David, do you have your hand up? No. I have a couple of questions.
I do, actually.
Okay, David, I know that. Remind us of the time, please, because.
No, it wasn't to remind you of the time. I just want to make sure everyone was aware the city really takes diversity and inclusion very seriously. So one of the things that we do is on an annual basis, we publish our diversity numbers for the entire city, and that includes a breakout by department. So what I can send to everyone is the fiscal year 20 EEOC report, which actually does show a gender and a ethnic cultural background breakdown of the department by sworn and non-sworn, as well as by rank, so that you can have some of that information regularly available, and it is published on our website. So I'll send that to everyone here.
Thank you, David. So Chief, I had a couple of questions. One is, what do you base on knowing how many officers you need? Is it based on the crime rate currently in Berkeley, or is it based on which populations need more service? So there might be more officers in that area. It's just interested in hearing your answer.
Yeah, we're going to touch on that specifically when we come back and talk a little bit about our follow-up information around the audit and budget. That's all going to get wrapped up in one, and we're going to give you a lot of information about our beat structure and how that works.
I really appreciate that, but I also appreciate that the City of Berkeley 21-22 budget will be approved June the 30th, which makes me think that we don't have that much time to influence at least this year's budget process. So would you say that's true? You only have 5 weeks to June 1st, I think.
I will say that we'll be having a budget. I believe we're slated to have a budget discussion with you prior, the first June meeting, I think, is when we're talking about budget with you.
Thank you. My other question was about CIT International. I attended last year's conference and was amazed at the richness of the level of training, and to have to be exposed to and hear about countries from around the world and how they deal with this is really critical. So I'm hoping that you will send somebody this year or at least look into the curriculum?
Yeah,
What-
I would absolutely be interested in looking at that. Like I said, we're very interested also always in expanding our trainings that are relevant to our work and looking for additional trainings. So thank you for sharing that.
My last question is about, these are difficult times for all police divisions and all across the country. Have you spoken with cities that have made significant cuts and also cities that have totally said, we're going to start from scratch? And are you, getting any ideas from them and making some plans internally, which I think is going to be very important for this community, is to see that efforts were made to try to reach towards a 50% cut. Nobody is saying this year, next year, but that's sort of the community's will, and that's what was in the legislation. So I want you to just think about that. And then when you come back next time, just give us more information about that. Thank you.
Thank you. You're very welcome.
David, do we move on to the next? There we go. So moving on to Specialized Care Unit Overview. Welcome, Dr. Lisa Warhus. Really looking forward to hearing from you.
Vice Chair. Sorry, Commissioner Dangerfield wanted to also ask a question.
I am so sorry. I saw his hand and was going to remember it, and then the meeting just kept going and hands keep coming up. My total apologies. Is it a question that we can send to the chief?
I did have some questions. I can say my learned commissioner and colleagues have already asked most of them. So I'm going to leave it to the singular question. What is the oversight body for posts that approves the content of the curriculum for the training and the instructors?
So I don't want to misstate that. I want to make sure I get it really accurate. So I'm going to bring that answer back to you. I will share what I have always been very appreciative about posts is that they are not stagnant in their subject matter. And often legislation will get passed that directs posts to add things to their training. And is very specific about the number of hours that need to be added and what the topics are and what it needs to be covered. I know that's one way that their work is directed through state government. But like I said, I want to make sure I give you a full and complete and accurate answer. So I will come back on that and make sure we get that covered.
Fair enough. If just actually do have one question.
Go ahead.
And that is, if you have
Your mic is frozen. Commissioner Dangerfield, we can't hear you. Can't hear you. Your screen is frozen, sir.
Do you want to come back to him, Vice Chair Chima?
Please. Can we get Mr. Dangerfield back up?
No, it looks like he's having technical issues. I guess we can ask him for his comment later.
Okay. Okay. So can we?
And I'm going to apologize. I actually have to step away to help take care of my family. I thank you guys, and I will be back with you Wednesday next week to talk about fair and impartial policing.
Thank you. Can you put the agenda back up, please? Here we are at the Specialized Care Unit Design Project. Many of us in the community get all warm and fuzzy when this slide goes up. So we appreciate you being here, and we're really looking forward to your presentation.
Thank you so much for having me. I am really happy to be here with you all this evening. I also want to thank all of the commissioners for your service and commitment to this reimagining process. I believe that our community has quite a lot of passion around this work, and just by listening to your questions and your due diligence, I feel very honored to be able to be part of this this evening. I'm here to talk about the specialized care unit. I will introduce myself. Actually, my name is Lisa Varhus. I'm the director of the Health, Housing, and Community Services Department. I am also the coordinator of the Specialized Care Unit Design Project. I want to say that this talk and dreams and hopes around this project have been percolating in our community for a long time. There is a lot of wisdom around what people feel is needed and what people would like to see in our community. There are multiple perspectives, there are multiple experiences, and part of the heart of this project is to actually capture all that and to design something and to pilot something that is really great for Berkeley. I just want to clarify, I'm sure everybody here knows, but because it's a recording, I want to make sure I'm clear about what I'm meaning when I'm talking about a specialized care unit. What we're talking about here is a new way of responding to mental health crises, mental health and substance abuse crises in our community that involves trained professionals who know how to respond in a crisis, know how to de-escalate, and does not include police, particularly in areas where there is no clear danger and where people are skilled to be able to respond accordingly. And part of the idea behind that is that there are many trained people in other fields than police, such as mental health, public health, emergency services, that just have a different approach and that in many cases may actually help to de-escalate a crisis. And there are other projects, many out there that are being piloted across the country. And there are many in our community that feel that, and our council that feel that it's ripe to have such a project in Berkeley. So that is the core context. And I'm going to share a little bit about the timeline of where the work has gone so far. And of course, I'm very happy to answer questions at the end. So overall, the project goals are around community outreach and engagement efforts to better understand what the community is seeking. We have many, we have people in positions of authority. We have people who have not been in authority, but have responded to crisis. We have people who have experienced crisis. We have people of all multi-races, ethnicities, sexual orientation, gender identity, many who have had different experience with regard to crisis. And a core part of our work is to really get out there and capture all of those voices and to use that as well as research around other best practices to really define and design what the Berkeley community needs. The city, and I will talk a little bit about our stakeholder process in a minute, but we have contracted with RDA, who is currently helping us to understand the experience and perceptions of current mental health related to and substance abuse related to crisis response, to understand the challenges and the strengths of the current crisis response options, ideas for alternative approaches to crisis, and really to understand the needs that the community is identifying in terms of a safe and effective crisis system. So what they're engaged in now is a deep community engagement process to really understand this picture and to use all of the information that they're collecting from multiple sources to design and implement and design a crisis model as well as an implementation plan for the best model for Berkeley. And then our charge, as defined by council, is to implement that plan through a pilot project. I will add that I don't like the word pilot project, even though it's part of the legislation. I think that the community is asking for a change and there may be a ramp up, but I like to think about a pilot more as a phase 1 implementation of something that the community really wants to see. And that's the language that I'm trying to use as we talk about this. So I'm just going to describe and get people up to date on the process that has been thus far. Here's a work plan overview, and I did submit some materials for your review to show where we are. And it's basically broken down into 6 phases. We had the project initiation that started in January once we had the contract with the consultant. We also created a steering committee. I'll go into that in a minute, and I will review all of these phases. We've gone through materials development. That has been a long-going process with lots of feedback and input. We're initiating the community experience and the landscape assessment. We'll be going into program planning, which basically means taking all of the analysis of the information we've received thus far and using that to inform program design. We will be doing program implementation planning, which is essentially for our consultant doing a implementation plan for a SCU, and then communication. We are doing our best to be as transparent and in communication with community as best as we can, while also running around and doing all the things that sometimes makes that hard. And I will review briefly each of these 6 phases.
Ma'am, this is Hector. I'm so sorry to cut you off. You're having some audio glitches. I don't know if that's just me, but like the sound is kind of like bouncing. It's kind of like, yeah, sounds almost like you're putting your
Is that true for everybody?
Yeah, it's a little funky.
A little rumble, like the mic is shaking or something.
Okay, can you give me a 2-second break and I'm going to switch my headset? How about that?
You're fine now. It's weird.
Yeah.
Oh.
Just now you
So
were
maybe
fine.
I just have to talk brighter and quicker and not end of day. How's that?
Let's try it again.
Better? Okay, I'll try to keep going. Okay. Sorry. Let me go up here. Okay. So as I said before, this project, there's many people in our community have been dreaming and talking and planning this SCU for many years. And as a newcomer to the city, I am by no means, nor are our staff an expert in the community wisdom that there is. And so the first thing in order to honor that wisdom that we did was to really form a steering committee that could really help lead the process along with our consultants. So we formed a steering committee that consists of representatives from both health, housing, and community services and fire from the city of Berkeley, but also representatives from the Mental Health Commission and the Berkeley Community Safety Coalition. And some of you, in fact, here are also part of that steering committee. And so we just, knowing that people have been working on this for many years, we made sure to have that representation. And so we kicked that off in January, normed that committee and created a work plan that I've sent to you and has been revised. And we have been meeting bi-weekly to drive this process together. The next piece of our work, which we've been doing since February and now is finally coming to a close here in May, is to develop a stakeholder outreach and strategy. How would we, who are the stakeholders we needed to reach out to? Both stakeholders in terms of community-based organizations, people who have experienced crisis, people who have friends and family that have experienced crisis, service providers, city providers, Alameda County. We actually have quite a thorough, exhaustive list, thanks to some members here who have helped to inform that are also on the steering committee, and really have an exhaustive list of who we want to make sure to include in the community engagement process. We've worked to develop interview questions, very clear and clean interview questions. We have made some data requests of the police, of fire, of community agencies, and the RDA, our consultant, has met with each steering committee member, or if they haven't completed that already, are in the process of doing so, to really get really unique inputs rather than sort of group-led inputs, to really get individual input so that they really can hear the voices of the people who have been passionate and been thinking about this for a long time. So we have now sort of staged ourselves to be able to do the deeper community engagement work. So we're going to be gathering data from a variety of sources because we know that people can contribute in different ways, and there are different ways in which we can actually reach and engage with individuals and groups. So we have engaged in a community survey, which I believe piggybacks off of the Nick Jr. survey. And so RDA has worked with Bright Research Group to help develop that. We will be engaging in provider and are in the process of scheduling and conducting provider and partner interviews and focus groups. We will be doing CBO and community advocate focus groups. We'll be doing listening sessions in the community. We'll be doing community member interviews and focus group of a wide variety of people diverse groups of people who have had experience in the crisis work. We'll be doing benchmarking and best practice research and a lot of document review around best practices. And what I'll say is it's actually a very interesting flow through which we are engaged in this community outreach process. As we said, we've identified a large number of agencies that we want to work with. And through the focus groups and the connections that we're building with those partners and CBOs, we'll also be identifying individuals that we can, speak with individually, ways of creating focus group with a variety of diverse individuals. So we're using sort of the initial provider, partner, and CBO focus groups to actually leverage to get into community to help build those trusting relationships with individuals who will share their experiences in a crisis response situation. I also want to add that even beginning this week, I'm aware that our consultants are going to be with the support of some of our stakeholders. Our steering committee members will be doing some walks around some of our encampments and other places where people may have experienced crisis. So we are both reaching out to individuals and community groups through the CBOs and partners, and also leveraging the relationships that some of our steering committees have on the ground with people that they work with, know, and care about. So that's a lot of information that we're going to be gathering in a very robust and comprehensive way. And it's going to take a bit of time following that effort to actually analyze that, do some real systems mapping, and make some initial program recommendations. We really want to make sure that we're taking the voices of everybody who's contributing very seriously, and counter to a lot of other kinds of community input sessions, we're really going to try to present our findings in a real narrative form that can really speak to the hearts of what we're experiencing out there, and not just data and numbers are really important, but feelings, emotion, and livelihood is also important. And so it is our intention to actually capture not just the sort of factual information, but actually the emotional information and the and the hopes and the experience of people in a real way that really humanizes them. So we're going to take that information, create some initial program recommendations, and then our intention is to go back to the community to sort of say, here are our program recommendations. What do you think? Not just design them and say, we're done, we heard you, but actually say, we heard you, we came up with this, and what do you think? So we're going to be planning some sessions around that. And then following that, we'll really be, honing all that information and creating both a program design as well as an implementation plan. And we'll be completing a final plan and report. Our hope is, of course, that simultaneous to all of this, documentation and narrative happening, that there's also work happening behind the scenes on the city side and in the community side to really set the stage for a pilot that we would hope would be able to begin, by the end of the year. And so while the SCU work is really about, doing this deep community engagement process and design and coming up with a really clear, great plan for Berkeley, we also have to be doing some work on the side to really pave the way to make sure that that can happen when it's ready. And then finally, we are doing our best to provide ongoing communication around the work. First of all, we do have bi-weekly steering committee meetings to help drive the work forward. And all of our steering committee members are really encouraged to communicate with their constituents, with the people that they're working with, and really communicate what's happening in an open kind of way. It is not an open group because it is really a work group that, because so many, it is a work group that actually has to get the work done, but it is a diverse group to make sure that we're really representing what we believe the community wants to happen, and is also, as us individuals on it, are listening and learning and giving feedback and injecting that into the conversation. There are also bi-weekly coordination meetings between RDA and the City of Berkeley Coordinating Committee. I have a staff of 4 people that are also helping behind the scenes to help do some of this research and to help create some connections to, for example, Alameda County and other places. So we just have a group that meets to make sure that RDA is on track, that we are on track, and that we are responding to what the steering committee is asking for. And every month at the Mental Health Commission, I do also give an update and take questions around the SCU. And of course, I'm here today, and I believe I'm scheduled to come back at the Reimagining Public Safety Task Force. And that's the end of this formal presentation, and I'm happy to take questions.
Hands up, please, so I can call you. Margaret Fine.
I mean, I'm actually more have a comment because today we had the task force community engagement subcommittee meeting, and really being part of the SCU, I think it's been really brilliant. I think that the way in which the community engagement process has evolved has been really deep, transparent, and robust, and based upon that example has inspired what we talked about today, and being able to have that kind of relationship with Bright Research would be just as helpful, because we need to be able to collaborate on the outreach and engagement plans, to collaborate on focus group questions, to collaborate on data analysis. And I think that at every level that, I mean, it's a lot of work to be part of it, and it's challenged me a lot. I'm learning so much, and I feel like I'm sharing, but I hope that that kind of process can be brought over to the task force in this next section after we deal with the citywide survey. So I just wanted to say thank you, Lisa, for everything you've done.
Thank you, Margaret. You've really been a huge asset to the steering committee as well.
Thank you. Dan, Commissioner Dan Lindheim.
Thank you for the presentation. One of the things that I've had a lot of confusion about, and the more police officers I speak with, the more confusion I have, is that most officers say, sure, we don't want to be responding to mental health calls, but the issue is you don't know that it's a mental health call until you already show up. How are you addressing that kind of issue? And at what point do you know that it's a mental health call so that the SCU is in fact the appropriate group to respond? And also the corollary to that is, how do you protect the members of the SCU from whatever kind of dangers once in a while can occur?
That's really an excellent question, Commissioner Lindheim. And it is also part of our process to help to identify and clarify how that would work. I am also aware from the auditor's report that oftentimes from the moment of the call until somebody arrives on scene, the picture changes dramatically. And part of the work and the research that we're going to be doing, looking at best practices and other places, as well as the input from the community, we're hoping to be able to further refine that, to be able to define what that is. I do imagine that is something that we will grapple with long term. And I think actually, but getting to a point where we can have a model and have really some informed practices about that, we will learn and hopefully hone that going forward. But that is definitely something that we will be grappling with going forward.
Dan, anything else? Commissioner Malvito?
Yes. I don't know about y'all, but I'm really, really excited about the SCU. There's so much work that's been going into it. I know that there's a lot of wonderful people working on it. I'm just excited for it to get the runway that policing has for so long just kind of had on its own to make those mistakes. And, you know, it sounds like it's going to have to be a learning build the plane as you fly it kind of thing. I did want to ask, I think 2 questions. One can be answered really quickly. And that one is, in the steering committee, is there anyone there who is Latino or Latinx or immigrant, anyone who represents that specific demographic?
Or API.
Yeah, I mean, I think that we have a wide range of diversity on the steering committee. I think we do have one member who's Latinx. What I will say is that our steering committee is passionate, very passionate about making sure that we reach out to all constituent groups. You know, we have consumer representatives, we have people who have worked in community. We have an individual who's experienced major death and crisis that has happened related to a unfortunate crisis response. It is a fairly representative group, and I would say that, you know, we can always be more representative. But definitely the hearts and soul and mind on the committee is very much on, you know, representation and understanding multiple voices, multiple cultures, ethnicities, and experiences.
No doubt. Thank you. I guess a follow-up to that is, as a part of the, you know, the outreach and the community engagement, given that there's been just historically a big disconnect with just generally anything that comes out of the city or the Latino community, and a lot of the communication is going to fall onto the CBOs and the community groups, right? Like the buck is gonna pass to us to get the word out about these listening sessions and maybe even co-host with the SCU what some of these listening sessions or, you know, outreach engagements. Have you developed a list of stakeholders that you're planning on reaching out to that, you know, can bring that kind of information to you and maybe get the word out on that? And is the SCU steering committee willing to maybe present at some of these groups, even if it's a brief presentation, to sort of bring people up to speed, because some people might not know that the SCU is being worked on for so long? Thanks.
That's a great question. Thank you. And I would agree. One of my departmental goals actually is to really strengthen our bond with our community agencies who really do amazing work and do work in ways that government can't always like connect and relate to. And we need to actually value that expertise, in my view. Yes, I do believe the steering committee there are members who have been very active in talking with different groups. It's hard to get to every group. I'm happy to share the list of all of the CBOs and community groups that we are working off of. It's quite comprehensive to share it. And, you know, we could use all the help that we can get in really getting to different groups. So that is definitely our intention, to make sure everybody can be a part of this.
Great. If you have not already done so, I would love to connect with Latinos Unidos de Berkeley,
yes,
as well as Multicultural Institute and La Peña.
Yes.
I'd be happy to provide that info if you need it.
That would be fantastic. And I can tell you how much I value all of their work in multiple areas.
Thank you.
Dr. Warhus, I have a couple of questions and one piece of good news. And Hector, you will appreciate this as well. The list of 140 CBOs that Dr. Fine and I put together, I'm now with help from somebody in the community, because I kept asking the city, can I have the CBO list? Can you tell? And everybody was like, proprietary information. So we hit the websites and everything. And, you know, this information is all public. And out of that little bit of frustration, I'll have the list Monday. It has all the phone numbers, email addresses, websites, names of executive directors, and you'll have it all for the 140 almost. A few we're having trouble with. So nobody has to think about it. The list will exist in the city of Berkeley and anybody can use it because we didn't collect any information that was proprietary. I had a question looking at the timeline that you put forward, and there were like 6 or 7 areas that will flow one after the other after the other. Are you planning to keep this steering committee to remain the same steering committee during the entire process? Or when it comes to program planning and program implementation, which is the only area that I see a little bit of weakness, if it can be called that, in the steering committee, will you be bringing in more experts to inform those discussions in terms of this is how much money it takes to do this, if we do this? Because I believe that this is an incredible opportunity to transform how we've done things in Berkeley. So when you're preparing your various scenarios, one might be, one to look at is all community-based approach, no police backup, maybe some interaction with the fire. Another might be police backup. Another one might be some other kind of blend or mix. And all of those are going to cost different depending on who's going to be running them and whether we're paying city salaries or whether we're paying CBO salaries. So at that point, I hope you'll bring a couple of people in who do that and at least have a listening session with them. These could be a couple of executive directors who've run big organizations and big programs. But I think we should use this also. I'm so excited about this and really excited about what I'm going to say next, in case you can't tell. I think we should look at the SCU as the hub, the community outreach and mobile crisis hub, that from there, activities happen that are mobile by car or something else, but also bicycles, also people on foot so they can get into the encampments. So if a call goes out, that can be, people can respond more quickly and not just wait for this van to show up to solve their problems. So I hope that, you can push this out as much as possible. And let's have this incredible thing in Berkeley that everybody would want to duplicate, because otherwise we're just another cahoots, another something else. We might add something here, we might add something there. I would like to see people rapidly responding to where the problems are in our entire city. And please think about what costs that might be, and also including peers in the effort. So it's not all, and I'm so happy that the mental health division is going to hire a few more. So I keep having these visions and ideas, and I will keep sending them to you.
I think that's, I'm sorry, I really want to smile, but see, part of my problem tonight is I'm trying these new headphones and they don't fit. So if I smile too wide, they're going to fall out of my ear. So bear with me, just human. Commissioner Chima, so first of all, thank you. I feel like we're along the same lines around the budget piece. There's lots of different scenarios that we need to think about. And we have been sort of starting to work through a preliminary budget that actually is taking those things into account, and hopefully we'll be able to share some information around that soon. When it comes, so the steering committee has worked really hard, to get us to a place where we can really get into this community outreach piece, which is really kicking off now in a big way. Once they've sort of gathered all of that input and come up with, done the data analysis and come up with some solutions, we will definitely be sharing that with the steering committee, but not just the steering committee. We'll definitely be, there's many stakeholder groups and individuals that are invested in this. So we will be looking at ways to be able to get input beyond the steering committee around what the design is and what people's thoughts are about that. So I just want to assure you that, the steering committee has been amazing in really helping to kick this work off the ground. And it is also a community endeavor.
Thank you so much. And we hope to see you again as this process moves forward. So thank you. Did anybody else have any questions? Otherwise, we're going to move on to our next topic. Thank you. David, you are the co-host for this next meeting, next session. Are you here with us?
I believe David Mohammed and the team is here.
Yep. Are we ready?
Yes, David Mohammed, you should have the floor.
Let me see if I can share a screen. First of all, good evening, everyone. I know it's been a very productive evening, and it should be very brief. I want to agree. I think it was Chair Chima may have said this, or one of the other commissioners, in terms of brief presentations and getting more into the discussion. That's certainly what we intend to do this evening. Two things. Oh, so let me just say the Bright Research Group was unable to join tonight. So that's why I'm giving the presentation for them today. There's two pieces. Both of these should be in your packet. One is the survey. I think there's been a few references that there's been a lot of great feedback, a lot of interaction, and significant amounts of edits to it based upon that. And so really appreciate the folks who have contributed significant amounts of great feedback to the survey. And so I will share screen to show it, but this is in your packet. We've made a number of edits. I think at one point Bright Research Group had submitted I think it was 10 pages showing all of the feedback that had been received and all the edits that were made. We have today received, I think it was 2 additional emails from commissioners, from task force members who were providing some additional feedback. And so I know Bright Research Group is in receipt of that. And we're hoping that we can make these edits to the survey, and the goal was to begin to launch the survey as early as tomorrow. But we can see how much. I know the 2 emails we received today, those changes can be made. So this is the survey. You have this in your packet. To the point earlier about brief presentation and then discussion, I won't go over every piece, but I will just scroll through it. It's 13 pages. So several of the requested changes were made. There were conflicting feedback, I've got to say. There was some feedback either from task force members or from city staff, some of which were in conflict, not a lot of it, but some of which were in conflict where we had to look at it and make some decisions. So I just want to mention that in terms of some of the feedback. It is going through some of this, and when we open it up for discussion, I can go to any one of these pages if you want. I'm just going through quickly, A, because of the hour, and B, because this is in the packet. And I know folks have had an opportunity to look through this and even provide some additional feedback on the survey as well. So again, the hope was to be able to launch in the next few days, potentially as early as tomorrow. And again, some of the feedback that we received so far, even since this version will be incorporated with, just with the challenge of they're trying to limit the questions. It's already beyond what we hoped in terms of wanting to make sure folks fill it out. But I think the feedback has been incredibly helpful, and hopefully you see that those were made. So I'll pause there. We have the other thing we want to show is the community engagement calendar so far, the draft community engagement calendar. That's the other agenda item that we intended to take together for this presentation, but I do want to pause here and take any questions or comments as it relates to the survey.
Okay, Lisa Lutzker, Commissioner.
Hi, thanks. Also, it's Liza, but
okay, next time.
Yeah, no, thank you. So thank you so much for, and thank you to Bright Research and everyone who's put all of these different thoughts together. The only thing I wonder is, Mike, I made a comment the first round and it didn't get changed. And I did send a follow-up email about it the second time. And it is actually a really concerning item to me. And I do really want to make sure that it gets addressed, which is on question number 24, where you do say, the information is confidential, but the data won't, the data that you report won't be with your email address, but literally you are collecting on a survey. There is no way that you can download the data from whatever platform that you're using where email addresses are not intermingled with the data that people are reporting. It's really, it's actually verging on like that. I think that you are, it's not a good practice. And I think it also has some real bad data security implications. I really, really encourage, if there's any possible way that this question can be moved to the end and that it links people out to a separate site where people enter their email addresses. First of all, and I think it like erodes public trust to, anyone who knows how SurveyMonkey works or Google Forms works knows that when you enter your email address, it goes with the survey responses. And you might separate them out later to give them to the city, but it's still there together. And this survey is collecting sensitive information. And I really would like to see that move out. I think it's a really important item. Thank you.
Thank you.
Commissioner Fine, then Commissioner Melvito.
Yeah, I just have a brief comment and question. First of all, I really appreciate how you embraced all the community and task force input. I just think this survey is going to be one that other cities will emulate. It's evolved so much since the beginning. I probably am one of the emails. I was just asking that when it says, if you've had a mental health crisis, that it says mental health and/or substance use, just to make sure the substance use gets into the questions with the mental health crisis. Like here, please share any experiences you've had with mental health or substance use crisis response. Those kinds of questions. I think it's in the email that I sent, but I didn't want that to get dropped off because there are quite a few events where it's a substance use issue.
Yes, thank you. And both of these last two comments were the two emails that I referenced. So yes, thank you. And Bright Research Group has both of those I'll say this, I have not talked to them about it. I have to say, I don't see any issue with either of these requests. So I'll circle back with my research group to try to make that happen.
I just want you to know I really appreciate what you did. It's fantastic.
No, thank you. And thank you for the great input. This, as you said, this has really evolved largely because of the great input from the task force members.
Commissioner Miller?
Was that me?
Yes.
Oh, thank you. Yes, I want to second and third and fourth all the positive reviews of all the work that you folks did on making the changes to the survey. I think it looks really good. My question is more about the plan for distribution, right? How this is going to make it out to the community. I know there's like a 500 goal of people folks that we want to meet. But there's certainly more than 500 people in Berkeley, and I want to make sure that we're doing our darndest to get the most out of this survey and make it really, really worthwhile. So I guess one question, really easy. What is the plan for distribution? Like what method? Is it going to be all online? Is it going to be a hybrid? And then I can ask my second question afterwards.
Yeah, so the method is going to be online. But at all of the feedback sessions, listening sessions, we also want to use that as a way to have folks fill it out on the spot. And so to have, still working out with the online forms, that makes it a lot easier, but there's going to be in-person forms and figuring out, will there be pads or whatever, including, COVID safe protocols, but it'd be all online. The distribution plan, which we'll make sure we send to task force members as well, but primarily is working through the list of CBOs that was provided. I believe it's the same list that was provided to SCU, that was provided to us as well. Working through those CBOs, certainly asking the task force to help us significantly to get it out. The city, as well as our partners, Pastor Smith, who's on, and others, Berkeley Youth Alternative and others, for the mass distribution. I agree. I would love to get into the thousands of responses. It's certainly what we hope to achieve.
Thank you for that. And actually, sort of a third question came out of that, but supplemental to this first one. I heard listening sessions, COVID protocols. Are these listening sessions going to be planned to be in person and online?
That's the next presentation after survey.
Oh, well, I guess one last bit. It's kind of similar to the same question I asked for SCU, but this one's about this. And what availability would Bright Research Group or anyone who or Nick Jr. have to maybe go to these CBOs maybe online and provide a presentation? A lot of us have worked very closely with the communities we serve, and we've sort of built that trust. And all of a sudden, this survey comes out for this task force that they never heard about. It might be a challenge, right? So I'm wondering what's the process to collaborate with folks on the ground to get people to trust the survey and want to be a part of it.
Yeah, no, good point. And that's a big reason why we want to go through the CBOs who have relationships with their constituents and people they serve and others. And so we'd be happy to do like an orientation or an information meeting specifically for CBOs to, introduce it to them and talk through distribution. That'd be great.
Right on. Thank you so much.
Absolutely.
David Mohammed, sir, I have a couple of questions. One, when do you think you will have the list as to which listening sessions with which groups, which CBOs, and when they will happen? So we can tell people who we know who are living the experience to try to attend those, to try to provide technology for them so they can Zoom in. So it'd be great if community knew when, which cluster of CBOs, so we could also do outreach to get more people to the listening sessions.
That's the next agenda item in this meeting. And so we'll show that it's not finished, but we'll show you what we have so far on.
Okay. Are we ready to go? Oh, Bernali, I see your hand.
Well, I wanted to hear more actively that you understood the comment that Liza brought up about the email address, because for me, that is a huge red flag. And I want some assurance that it will be changed. And I want to hear maybe from David White that he will also ensure that the survey doesn't go out in that form, in the form it is now, where the email address isn't separated from the responses. Because I personally would not feel comfortable sharing that with folks if that wasn't changed. And I don't want it to be made public in this form. So can I get some assurance that it will definitely be changed and that somebody's taking responsibility for it?
So I can directly jump in. So what I can give you every assurance of is that we will absolutely get back together with David Mohammed and the team, and we'll explore two possible options. One is we'll explore the option of providing a link for folks to provide their email address to provide us with their contact information. We do have some, David and the team are working on a separate standalone project website. So I could see one option being to direct them to that website to drop in their emails. I do, however, just sort of, because I'm intellectually curious based on the feedback we've received, I would like to understand from Bright Research Group a little bit how these emails come in and how it sort of gets associated or not associated with the survey, just to understand more deeply whether or not there are security protocols that we could report back to everyone on that might meet the input we're receiving. I just don't have that depth of knowledge, but I can give you every assurance we're going to work hard to address the comments that have been received.
And the other thing I'll say is I think Commissioner Lester made a good point in terms in surveys I've been involved with before, which is you can ask for emails, but not in the survey, right? And then because if the desire is you want to be able to communicate with people and send them information, you don't need to collect the email at the survey. And so that is, I know I've been a part of other surveys that have done it like that. I don't see any reason why we can't do it like that. I do want to hear from my partners, Bright Research Group, about, I don't know if there was a specific reason. I'm assuming, that wasn't, discussed. So I think we could easily just, if the desire is to collect the emails, to do it in a separate part entirely.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, I've done, small community surveys for projects I've worked on, and even Google Forms lets you link out to a separate place for putting in an email. So maybe there's a different backend technology that you're using that does that automatically. But this is a big deal, and I want to make sure you understand how important it is and how important it is to folks who are going to be sharing it out, that you don't have some kind of data breach, that you don't have anonymity, impacted in some way, and therefore lose trust. And because the survey process in general it's taken a whole subcommittee to get it to the point where it is. Even me as a layperson was not very happy with what we were first presented with. So therefore, I feel the need to speak and then make sure that you're taking it seriously. So anyway, thank you, David. And I appreciate it.
Commissioner Liza Lutzker.
Yeah, just a quick follow-up. David, I'm just wondering, David White, you were saying that there's like a website that's being built out, but I guess my question is, the city already has the capability of, right, there's already a whole system that the city has where you can sign up for interest in this commission or that commission or any of those things. It seems like that capability is already built in. And so I would just recommend using the already internal built-in capability of the city. And my guess, honestly, as someone who has been writing surveys for the last 15 years on a variety of platforms, first of all, is that there is no way to disentangle those things. But then second of all, is that my suspicion is that the placement of that question is before the demographics, because I think that the intent is for people to be able to ask for information about the commission before they provide demographics, which they might choose to skip. But in my mind, it's much more important that we keep it anonymous than it is that people don't get like, if people want information, they'll figure out how to get to it. It's just really critical, especially when on such a sensitive topic. So
I totally hear the feedback and the concern, so I don't take any exception or concern to it. If I can, I'll say if Shamika or I can find a way to use our city website for this and to contain, that's great. If we can, we will explore all options that we have in front of us. So if we can, we'll figure it out.
Are we moving on to the next item? Yes?
If you're ready for me, absolutely.
Any other questions?
I don't see any public comment either.
Okay.
Chair Chima.
Mr. Mohammed, please continue.
All right, let me get the next one up. So what this is going to be when the screen comes on, here we go, is this is still draft, there's still to be developed. Let me try to broaden this a bit so you can see, so you can see it. Is a, I totally messed that up, is a schedule of, there we go. And I also want to say Pastor Smith is on the line as well. And Pastor Smith, feel free to jump in if you want, or respond to questions. So this is the beginning of tracking, or the beginning of placing the listening sessions and other community engagement efforts. So obviously the survey, which we've talked about, the first listening session has been scheduled for May 25th, which will be a focus on the Black community. It will be a Zoom session. So we definitely think that we already have the link for that. We'll make sure we share that for folks to be able to get people from the Black community to that listening session. And Pastor Smith is leading that effort. And again, that'll be May 25th in the evening at 6:30. Then the Center for Faith, Food and Justice, which Pastor Smith also helps to lead, is having a session of housing unstable and formerly incarcerated, with the focus of people of color within those populations. That's set for June 9th in person at the McGee Avenue Baptist Church. We are continuing to work with BYA to get groups focused, to get to schedule. We're just trying to get dates for Black youth and young adults, for Latinx youth and young adults. We're also, again, this is going to be flushed out more as we go on and identify partners, as well as to work with in terms to have focus groups for particular populations, as well as we'll see for citywide. We had a focus group with the command staff of the police department on May 6th. We are scheduling focus groups for line staff. The police department has requested 4 of them. We're not sure if we can accommodate all of that within the time frame, but we're working with them. As you also heard, the Berkeley Merchant Associations have asked for focus groups. We're meeting with two heads of merchant associations tomorrow to plan those. May 14th is the tomorrow, the planning meeting, but to plan future focus groups, listening sessions. We're going to do 2 citywide town halls. So figuring out what's the best time, place. We really want to do that in complete partnership with the task force. So really want to get some thoughts in terms of working with you all to do this citywide town hall. And then after the draft of the final report that we are going to develop, we want to have district specific plans, district specific meetings to get feedback on the plan. And then Bright Research Group will be developing a report for this wouldn't probably include the district specific meetings because of timing, but they're going to include a report, obviously for the survey response, but also the summary of the community engagement and listening session. So that is the current draft. Obviously, there's dates for the meetings here to have, and then there's other meetings that we will add to this. And so I don't know, Pastor Smith, if you want to add anything to that, or just if there's any questions to respond to.
No, David, it just, I think that's pretty comprehensive what we've talked about so far with Bright Star and where things are. I am saying the reason we are really trying to do the listening session for the unhoused community, and particularly unhoused community of color in person, is that many of you know that the issue of access, as we were talking with Bright Star about some of the population that we work with, to really think that many of them don't necessarily have access to Zoom or other social media accounts and activities. We're going to try to manage it, obviously in a social distance and safe way, but in a way that people can feel comfortable and still link in. We'll probably have to do it outside in the parking lot and make sure we have incentives for folks to be there. But we definitely want to be able to capture that as well.
Margaret Fine.
Yeah, I need to back up here. I'm on the SCU committee and I see the great lengths that we have gone to be thorough in ensuring we're inclusive with the community and developing the questions together. And right now I feel like I'm looking at a plan where, and I've read your contract thoroughly, so I understand what that language is, and I'm a lawyer, but right now I'm seeing different communities, the Black community, housing unstable, incarcerated, and that really doesn't tell me youth, doesn't tell me who you're reaching out to and who really is included. And I can say from my perspective, because I'm from the LGBT community, that there is a lot of over-policing and police violence with transgender women of color and homeless LGBT youth. I don't see an AAPI listening session. That concerns me a lot, particularly what's been going on in the community. With the SCU group, we reviewed all the focus group questions. We went thoroughly through them. Everything, just like the citywide survey, has been processed through the SCU steering committee. And here I would think for the task force, the same thing would be going on. And now we're looking at a listening session that's scheduled like May 25th. And there's also an expectation that task force members are going to disseminate this. But I think it all starts from the beginning and everybody needs to have an opportunity to participate.
Yeah, thank you. One thing that I did absolutely fail to mention is similar to how in the survey, so the SCU RDA was going to administer a survey in collaboration with Bright Research Group. They decided they wouldn't. They would add some questions to this survey that Bright Research Group has developed with you all's great input. But similarly, because they are going to do several listening sessions and community engagement that Bright Research Group is working with them to ensure that there's some questions to ensure on those that would
No.
inform this work as well. And so
They're
there is
not, because
there is this collaboration with Bright Research Group and RDA that's been ongoing.
No. I am very familiar with that collaboration, and I have just done the last cut on the focus groups, and they are centered on crisis response systems and not on overall policing and police violence. And that's why, not having seen the questionnaire or the questions that are being put forth in these sessions is really concerning me, because I want to know if there's a difference between what's going on here on the Reimagining Task Force and the SU, because we are narrowly drilled down to the crisis response system.
Thank you, Commissioner Fine. Commissioner Malvito, and I'll put my hand up.
Thank you. I just wanted to offer a way or a question for the Berkeley Youth BYA, Berkeley Youth Alternatives, and that is, we, the organization I work with, Latinos Unidos, we work closely with Berkeley High School students and also with UC Berkeley students, and we have connections with BCC. And I'm wondering if like what the scope of youth means, like what ages we're talking about. Are we talking about folks under 18, or like young adults? And just as a way, who can I connect with so I can plug those folks in if they have not already, so that we can get a broad outreach on that.
Yeah, no, great question. And we did talk about that because even we talked about, should there be for younger youth like teenagers, and then should there be young adults up to 24? We haven't landed that yet, so we would love to certainly collaborate. Kevin at BYA, but we'll make sure that you're in touch with Bright Research Group to help participate, but also to make sure we get the information from you. However, there could be a collaboration, like you said, to get the most outreach.
Right on. Thank you.
Absolutely.
Commissioner Hager, I was muted. Sorry about that.
No problem. Thank you. So I was wondering if there's going to be outreach to the Black community outside of the Black church. That's another thing we discussed in our subcommittee. Obviously, not all Black people are religious. Many religious Black people do not belong to Christian denominations, not to mention the fact that some LGBTQ people feel very disconnected and disaffected by the church. So I was wondering if there's any outreach that could take that into account.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll say this. I mean, I'm a Black person that's been in Berkeley a long time. Mm-hmm. And I've seen a lot of things come and go that's not just church. And I actually didn't even just start working in the church. And oftentimes, I hear that outside the church, but we work very closely with organizations like Healthy Black Families, the NAACP. One of my concerns has not even just been because a lot of the people that we're reaching out to are not just church folks in the community, but there are some of these other organizations where Black folks are intersectioned. And we're continuing to do that, and we will continue to do this. And our history with Through Faith and Justice, even though the word faith is in our name, we're not necessarily just grounded in Christian faith. We deal with people of many faiths. We deal with people of no faiths. And so we're really working out inclusively. I think the other thing that I think it's important for me to say to this group, because I know that there was some comment about those that are, people that we're reaching out to. And I really stand very firmly and strongly with all communities. And whether somebody mentioned the API community, I definitely stand with them, the Latinx community, the LGBTQ community. I also think in some of these circles, what gets lost when we're talking, faith aside and no faith aside, is really what happens to young Black and brown people, and particularly those who have been unhoused and previously incarcerated. And I take that very seriously. And oftentimes, even in task force like these, of which I've participated in for many years, that as we are trying to be inclusive, very much where we should, and I commend the efforts, but I also think that sometimes we will water down, and we don't want to hear the voices of some of the folks, not all, but some of the folks that are close to the pain as well. And so I hope that in the spirit of inclusivity, whether we are dealing with, Black and brown folks, AIPI folks, LGBTQ folks, elderly folks, physically challenged folks, I hope that we all have the same spirit of inclusivity. And we surely will do that for the 25th. And one of the things I must be very honest with you about, in reaching out to the Black community beyond the Black church in response to what you're saying, is that people that aren't connected to the church have already said to me, is this something that we really feel that we can be our full selves and be honest in meetings like this and get our input? So I will do everything in our power to include everyone and make sure that the space is safe for everyone. But I hope and I urge, even on the task force, that spirit prevails here as well.
Thank you for that, Pastor Mike Smith. I don't think any of us, or at least I'm not hearing this, that any of us are saying that all of these efforts that are listed here should not be done. I think we're saying, great, you're going to focus on the Black community, awesome. And focus on housing unstable and formerly incarcerated people of color from all across the city of Berkeley, because the unhoused people are spread out. They're in every district. And the focus group on Latinx youth, I think what we're saying is that there are certain groups of people in our community that I think would be valuable for this task force to also hear from, and encourage them to do this survey, encourage them to come to these listening sessions. I think it's one thing, if say I go into my Sikh community and say, this survey is really important to fill. There is going to be a listening session that's going to, pay attention to the violence that's been committed against AAPI people. What could the police have done? How does the police respond to you? I'm telling you, Pastor Smith, they are not going to come to any of these sessions that are listed here because they don't feel part of this community.
No, Bona, I get it, and I'm not saying that to argue. All I'm saying is, in response,
yes,
oftentimes that the same holds true, even in Black communities, and I can tell you this, in terms of across the board, and that's across ethnicity, gender lines, life orientation lines. And so I feel what you're saying. And maybe that is a larger conversation, David, with Bright Star that we have to have. I just think that a lot of times in those discussions, and I'm not trying to get on a tangent about the dwindling population of
yes.
Black folks. And when somebody mentions over policing, I'm not gonna lie, that does strike a nerve in me, because I'm a Black man in Berkeley who has been over policed, who doesn't have a record, and who's been jacked up. I could probably more any times than most of the folks on this call. And so I understand it more than people know. And so again, if there's ways, and David is our leader, if there's ways that we can do it to make sure not only the Sikh community or members of the AIP community or the LGBT community in general, that we can find those ways, we should be able to do that. But I also want to make sure that I assert this because, I'm somebody that experiences it on a daily basis.
Yes. You know how much I admire you and your work. And about time that we actually reached into the Black community and asked them what they think about a lot of things in the city of Berkeley. They've been shut out more and more and more. I want to ask.
And can I say, I thought I was talking, but I was on mute.
David, I was going to ask you if you would add to that.
Yeah. So I think one, thank you, Pastor Smith. Really appreciate that.
Yes, me too.
And your experience. And so I think, to your point, Chair Chima, that this is, this is what we have scheduled thus far, and it's the beginning, not the end. And so we certainly can add pieces to this. And so we'll circle back with David White, and as well as get input from the task force in terms of potential partners to work with, so that we can do that.
Thank you very much. Margaret Fine, you've spoken once before, Commissioner Fine. In this conversation, yes.
I was only going to say that some of this is really intersectional. When you look at homelessness, for homeless youth, the LGBT youth of color who are Black and Latinx is very, very high. I mean, maybe 3-4% of the population, but upwards of 20 or 30% of the homeless kids. And I think they're overpoliced differently than other Black men. And that's something we're just going to have to work out. And I respect what you have to say. I am so sorry about how much suffering that you've endured. And I really do believe that attention must be focused there. It's just there's some other groups that need to be included too.
And I don't disagree with that, Commissioner Fine. I just want you to know, I don't disagree with that.
Yes, I think that's understood. Commissioner Upton.
Hello, can you hear me all?
Yes, we can.
Okay. I'm trying to get the music turned off. There we are.
Yeah,
so I want to call our attention to what I think is a very important group who will not be included in the survey that's being done, and probably cannot be as a practical matter. But they're very important because the graduates of this group comprise a large proportion of all the different groups that will be included. The group I'm talking about is children who are not being raised in the homes of their parents because they've been removed and are being raised in institutions where the only parental type figures they have are shift workers who work, an 8-hour shift, and they're paid minimum wage and have basically no training for what they're doing. Or children who are in foster care and who typically move around from one to another to another to another foster care home 5, 10, 15, 25 times during their youth. I don't see how they are a very important group in terms of the damage that is done by their lack of parenting and the damage that they do to our society. They're not going to be included in your report, but I hope that the absence of them and the importance of them can be discussed in the report.
Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Fine, do you have your hand up, or is that from before? Okay, thank you.
I apologize. I'm sorry.
No worries at all. So where are we, David? David Muhammad first, and then David White. We've got a couple of things left on the agenda.
Yep, my part this is done. I think it's on David White.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you all. Thank you all very much.
Well, I might deliver some of the best news of the evening. I have nothing left to present. So Chair Chima, what was left was to come back to the subcommittee reports, I believe. And then there was a topic on, then there's a topic on the agenda for subcommittee discussion. and then items to place on the next agenda meeting.
Perfect. Okay, let's move into the subcommittee discussion. As a lot of people didn't ask us, questions about our subcommittees and what was going on, this might be an opportunity to do that. And if we're all feeling the lateness of the night, we could just go on to future agenda items, and I have a few. What's commissioners? Okay, so pass the subcommittee discussion for this meeting. Looks like it. And the agenda items that I listed one was about, if we're going to create more subcommittees, then we need to have that on the action list. And the two that have been mentioned have been alternatives on the ground. And the other one was about data, but I wasn't quite sure what that subcommittee would do. Anybody have any ideas about that, or did everybody leave? Where is everybody?
Well, I think, Chair Chima, we can put an item under action for subcommittee discussion, and then that would give you the flexibility at the next meeting to define whatever subcommittees you want to create.
And the other one was about streamlining this whole process a little bit. So if we could get at least some ideas flowing, not just what our subcommittee reported, I think that would be a good item to have. And that was all that was on my list. Bernali?
Yeah, thank you.
Absolutely.
I guess for our commission meetings, we'll often have upcoming dates and potential agenda items. I think that would be helpful just today, hearing the chief saying that she's going to come back for this, come back for this. I think just for us to be planning ahead. I'm also curious when Burkdot.
Well, in the Zoom links that were sent out, there is a list of all, at least we know the agenda, proposed agenda for the 19th, but I think that's how far we are.
Yeah, usually it's just in this under future agenda items, you just list whatever you know. Nobody's going to hold you to it, but it gives us some idea of the sort of the rhythm and what to expect. So that would be helpful. Like, I am wondering when the Burkdot presentation is going to happen for exam.
I thought it was listed on the 19th. Am I wrong?
Yeah.
You did, next week.
Next week.
Is it happening next? So we're having Burkdot and the police chief is coming back? So
no. The police chief is coming back as part of a response for fair and impartial policing.
Okay.
Do I have that correct? Yeah, okay.
Okay. Okay.
But I would like to add for the task force. So, and I think this will fit well with the discussion around streamlining. Chief Lewis did develop more thought around spreading out more presentations to the task force, so they would be more, like tonight, they would be very focused. They could be longer in depth. And so what I can do is I've sent a preliminary list over to both Commissioner Mizell and Commissioner Chima. And then once they give us the thumbs up, we're more than happy to put that into the bigger list and keep that updated and circulated with everyone, so you can see what the future looks like. And we can absolutely do something to the agenda as well, so you have profile on what's ahead. But just to reiterate, next week is going to be a presentation on the Fair and Impartial Policing Work Group that was, I think it was chaired by our Police Review Commissioner, Ramsey. And I know there were a whole bunch of very impressive folks in that working group. Tano, who I see as an attendee from the mayor's office, managed that as well. And then Chief Lewis will be talking about the police department's implementation of that. And then our public works director, Liam Garland, will be talking about Burkdot, because there's a nexus of the issues. And that'll be next week.
Those are two
Can we get
items. So I just want to
go ahead.
No, I would just want people to be prepared to hear. Those are two really big items.
Yes.
On one
And
agenda.
also, David, I wanted to say that whenever the police acting police chief shows up, there is so much interest in whether she presents something small or big that she needs that chunk of time, because it was almost 2 hours tonight. And the same was true last time.
She would appreciate hearing that, so thank you.
Okay. Anything else, folks? Margaret, you have your hand up?
Yeah, I wanted to ask if we can get a copy of that chart that was just put up with the schedule. If we can get their outreach plan, how they're outreaching in order to attract people to these different listening sessions. And if we can get a copy of the questions that are going to be presented for all those. I know the community engagement subcommittee will probably like to look at that, but that may be a very keen interest to everybody on the task force.
Yes. Thank you, Commissioner Fine. Do I have a motion to adjourn? And everyone, thank you so much. Thank you so much for such an excellent meeting and for supporting me tonight.
Shiva, we do have someone with their hand raised. I don't think
we don't. Who do you have?
Public comment, Vice Chair.
Public comment. Okay, let's do public comment.
Commissioner Ghosh, I think, had something to say as well.
I double checked in with her. I thought she was fine.
Well, I do want to keep in focus the discussion that came up today. I know, Chair Chima, you care about this too, related to the budget and when we actually get to discuss it. And right now, I'm very disappointed that we may not have input into the June budget, because
I
don't know when how the timing works. It usually takes 2 to 3 weeks prior. So David, if you could provide some insight into that at the next meeting, in terms of how our schedule is aligning with that, because as my understanding was, that was a key part of our task force. Was to influence.
I think our expectation always was that this task, just because of timing, when everyone got together, that probably there wouldn't be a lot of movement with the June, with the budget starting July 1st of 2021. So I think our thought was to get this work and hopefully be in a position where there could be recommendations and budget discussions with our November process, which will also impact the 2-year budget starting fiscal year July 1st of 2022 in the next 2-year cycle. I think we knew, just because of timing, that this budget cycle was going to be really hard.
Yeah, David, but there is an opportunity to send in recommendations until June the 1st. So I don't know if, so will they be taking any of our recommendations before?
Well, let me clarify what that timing is. So there's a timing for City Council to provide referrals to the city manager that we will compile and that the council and the budget committee will discuss about funding. But if you think about it, council can make budget decisions up until the date at which they adopt the budget. So, the budget won't be adopted until June 29th. So they can make a decision about allocating resources to a service up until that time frame.
So what I'm asking is, if this task force has 2 or 3 recommendations, like supporting the SCU or supporting some other things that BurkeDOT or some other things that we think are really critical and essential, can this task force send in recommendations for the budget?
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. Let's get to work on that.
I would say this task force could absolutely send a request or information to, however it's framed, to the city council. Absolutely.
Great. So just people know that I'm doing that for the person who appointed me, which is Councilperson Ben Bartlett. So if any of you in your communities have things that you want them to look at that they might not have seen, or nobody's made a recommendation for something. So I think we should agendize that, and then I could have that list, and then folks can, we could have it in the packet, and then folks can look at it, study it, and say, but in my community, there's a huge gap that we need to fill. It's all about public safety. Remember, folks, it's not just about policing. Pamela, you have your hand up.
I do, thanks. Just wondering on the streamlining suggested agenda item, are we agendizing that for the next full task force meeting to make motions and agree on it? Is that's what's the next step on the?
Hopefully the 19th.
I'm sorry?
Hopefully the 19th.
It'll have to be June, that 19th agenda. Well,
So what's
can
the
we
date after
talk
the
to you
19th?
offline? We did publish it, but I want to just check in with our city clerk. Maybe I could follow up with you offline, just so I can get it right.
Much. Thank you so much.
And since the 19th meeting is going to have, it's going to be very meaty and a lot in it, when, David White, do you expect us to get the presentations from the presenters in advance? How far in advance can we get those so we can read them and come in with informed questions?
So the information, I believe, and Shamika, please correct me if I'm wrong, but we did receive everything from the Fair and Impartial Work Group that has been published on the task force website already. So you can start looking into that. And then I'm hopeful that we'll be able to get a memorandum from our Public Works Director posted before the weekend. I will say we have provided you with background information on BERCDOT that's gone to both the Public Works Commission and Transportation Commission already. So if you familiarize yourself with those documents, you'll be fairly up to speed. But I think, Shamika, did you already post the one from Public Works Director? Okay.
Yes.
So all the
So
information.
Are you saying we have the Public Works Director's presentation?
Yes.
Yes, you
No,
have
you
the,
don't
well,
have-
it was just, go ahead, I'm sorry.
You have the memorandum that the presentation will be based on. So you'll have all, you already have all the detail. He'll just do a presentation to summarize it.
Okay.
Okay. Commissioner Malvido?
Yeah, I guess 2 questions. How quickly do you think we'll be able to get the report from the interim chief of police on the current status of the fair and impartial policing work?
So my gut tells, well, that's already been presented to the council. So I think, I don't know what her presentation specifically will look like. I'll ask her when that'll be ready. But you can certainly view and watch the department's presentation on this back in March, and we could always send out that link to that presentation if you want to see sort of how they're kind of approaching the discussion. I don't know specifically how they're handling next week, so I can follow up with her.
Okay, thank you. And second and last question. This is kind of in line with the budget, support or recommendations that are coming by way of different city council members in budget referrals. And I'm wondering, is there a way for us to have the budget referrals that are related to public safety at the very least come through the task force so that we can take a look at and make recommendations? Like if there's a budget referral for, say, security cameras, we would want to take a look at that. That would be something within the purview of the task force, I think, to then make recommendations for or against the implementation of that. I guess I'm open to discussing what this looks like, but I'm very interested in those pieces, especially with the budget conversation coming up.
So a couple of things. I think one is just, just to be direct, that is outside of the purview of this task force. So I think that is something you'd want to talk about with the council. The budget referrals that I'm referring to do come from council members. So that's their decision if they would want to vet any of their referrals to this task force, not mine or not Shamika's. And then in terms of what the organization brings forward, again, that is outside of the purview of this task force. So I would not imagine that those items would come through this body itself.
That's helpful. I guess I'm wondering, how is it outside of the purview of this task force.
So maybe we could take offline and we could go through that enabling legislation together. I'd be happy to do that with you, and then we can kind of work through that. I'd have no problem with that whatsoever.
Okay, thank you.
Someone must want to leave this meeting. So can we have?
We do have two public comments.
We have two public comments.
Please, let's bring them in.
Vice Chair Chimick, before you do that, can I just make a general announcement to the group? Is that I posted, as you mentioned, Dave, I posted the agenda for the May 19th meeting this evening already. But based upon the guidance that we get from the city clerk, it might be revised. So I wanted everyone to be aware that I might need to take it down tomorrow sometime and give you a revised version. Okay, but the one that's there is up right now. Okay, thank you
so much.
Let us bring in Kelly Hammergren is the first person to speak. Kelly, you're now able to speak.
Okay, thank you. Can you hear me okay? Can someone just nod and?
Yes, Kelly.
Okay, great. Okay, so I have 4 things to mention and I'll make them quick. One is that the police budget presentation was made to the Budget and Finance Committee on April 22nd. So I wanted to remind you of that. At the City Council meeting on May 25th, item 38 is the first hearing on the budget for fiscal year 2022. So that is already, that's going to be in the works as of May 25th. The next Budget and Finance Committee, the City Council meeting, is this coming Monday morning, the 17th. And then I listened to your discussion on the questionnaire and the concern about privacy. And I guess I was just wondering if you were considering the option for people to use the mail, you know, snail mail, the old-fashioned mail-in of response to the questionnaires to ensure privacy for those who might be anxious about connecting their email to the questionnaire response. And that's it. Thank you very much for letting me speak.
Thank you. We have one more person. David, do you know who it is?
It is Tano.
Good evening, everyone. Can you hear me?
Good evening.
I can hear you.
My name is Tano Trachtenberg. I'm an aide to Mayor Etta Gein. And as David mentioned, I was sort of the administrator of the Mayor's Fair and Impartial Working Group. And so I just wanted to give a follow-up comment as that presentation is coming to you all next week. I have been in touch with Chair Chima about this and understand the interest to streamline these presentations and keep them more concise. So I just wanted to point you that there are 2 sort of substantive longer items in your packet for next week. One is a council item from the mayor's office that sort of summarizes the background of what that working group did, the research, the process of forming it. And there's a lot of links and additional resources that you can dive into if you're interested. It was a full year of work, so it is or more. So it's not going to be easy to summarize in a meeting. So I encourage you to spend time with that if you're interested. And then also the other item is the working group's policy proposals themselves and some appendices. I do want to note that that document was drafted in late 2020, early 2021. And so then the police chief's presentation will pick up on that, but many months later. And then the other piece we included was the annotated agenda so that the council, you can see what exactly the council's action was in response to those recommendations. But if you have questions, you have 2 members of the working group that are part of this task force, and Nathan and Hector. And so I just wanted to call all of your attention to that because there was a lot of work that was done, and they'll be eager to share it with you. So thank you for all of your work, and I hope you have a great evening.
Thank you, Tano. I've sent all the documents related to fair and impartial once to this group. I'm happy to send them again before the next meeting, so they're fresh.
And
And
there
the
is one
packets
more.
that are already available on the website.
There's one more community member wanting to speak. It's Rivka Palatnik. Rivka, nice to see you 2 hours
Hi.
later.
Right. Hello, everyone.
Hi, Rivka.
Hi. I didn't realize we could have done public comment when the police chief was reporting, but I feel it's really important to emphasize de-escalation because like the 5 incidents that Cop Watch videotaped in the past year involving African-American men really needed de-escalation badly. And, you know, there was a little about de-escalation in the presentation, but I would like more focus on de-escalation as a really important training and performance evaluation. And also, I haven't been at all your meetings, so I may be asking something you already know, but I really was curious how much since the murder of George Floyd and all the others, you know, created something of a shift in this world of policing. Has the Berkeley Police Department changed anything about how they operate since then? Or are they still doing what they were doing before the shift with more public focus on wanting reform? Are they working on changes or are they sort of static at this point? They did say that the academy they send their people to does update their curriculum, but I wonder what the police department is what the Berkeley Police Department is updating, if anything, with the greater public demand for change. That's it. Thank you.
This closes our meeting, but I'm still waiting for a motion.
Second.
Who made the motion? Who seconded?
Bernali made the motion, I think.
And Commissioner
Thank you.
Harger seconded.
Commissioner who, I'm sorry.
Harger?
Thank
Alicia.
you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, everyone. See you on the 19th.
Thank you. Thanks.
Good
Sarah.
night.
Yeah.
And thank you, David and Shamika, for great support.
Yeah, thank you
provide.
so much.
Yeah.